They say a queen's greatest power is her crown, but on the night Queen Seraphina Vale screamed her son into existence while her husband warmed another woman's bed, she learned the truth. A crown means nothing when the man who gave it to you would rather watch you die alone. This is the story of a woman who loved a king until love became poison, and how she rose from the ashes of abandonment to become something far more dangerous than beloved. If you want to see how a discarded queen takes back everything they tried to bury her with, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is watching. The labor pains started during the evening bells, right when the autumn wind turned sharp enough to cut skin. Seraphina felt the first contraction rip through her abdomen like a blade dragging across bone, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. She had carried this child for 9 months through bleeding and bed rest, through the palace physicians shaking their heads and whispering that neither mother nor baby would survive to spring. Every day of this pregnancy had been a battle against her own body trying to reject the future heir of the Valan Empire. And now, on the night when that battle reached its final hour, she was alone. The queen's chambers stretched vast and cold around her, all marble floors and silk curtains that did nothing to hold warmth. 2 midwives hovered near the bed, their faces tight with the kind of professional worry that came from seeing too many women die in childbed. The head midwife, a gray-haired woman named Marjorie, who had delivered half the noble babies in the capital, pressed a cool cloth to Seraphina's forehead and spoke in the overly calm voice people used when they thought you might not survive the night. "Your Majesty, you need to breathe through it. The baby is coming whether we're ready or not." Seraphina gritted her teeth as another contraction seized her, this one lasting so long she thought her spine might snap. When it finally released her, she gasped out the question she had been asking for 3 hours. "Where's the king?" It was not really a question anymore. It was an accusation shaped like words. The younger midwife, a girl barely 20 who kept flinching every time Seraphina screamed, glanced at Marjorie with panicked eyes. Marjorie's jaw tightened, but her hand stayed steady as she checked the blood-soaked sheets beneath the queen. "His Majesty is attending the Harvest Festival, Your Majesty. I'm sure he'll come as soon as he hears." Seraphina laughed, and it came out like breaking glass. The sound made both midwives freeze. "He knows," she said flatly. "I sent 4 messages." 4. She had sent the first message when the pains began. The second when her water broke in a rush that soaked through her nightgown and pooled on the floor. The third when the bleeding started, dark and too heavy. The fourth when she realized she might actually die tonight. And her last coherent thought had been that she wanted to see her husband's face one more time before the darkness took her. None of the messengers had returned. The Harvest Festival was the crown's annual celebration. A week-long parade of excess, where the nobility gorged themselves on wine and roasted meat, while peasants starved in the outer districts. King Alaric loved the festival. More specifically, he loved presiding over it with Lady Eveline Marchand draped on his arm like a second crown, more precious than the first. Lady Eveline, the king's mistress. The woman who held more of Alaric's attention in one evening than Seraphina had received in 3 years of marriage. Another contraction hit, worse than before. Seraphina felt something tear inside her, felt warm blood gush between her thighs, and screamed so loud the sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling and probably carried all the way down to the throne room. Let the whole palace hear. Let them all know what was happening while their king danced with his whore. "Your Majesty, please, you have to push," Marjorie said urgently. "The baby's crowning. If you don't push now, you'll both die." Seraphina pushed. She pushed until blood vessels burst in her eyes, until her vision went white, until she felt her consciousness start to slip away into the dark. She pushed because that was all she had left. Not love, not hope, just the animal drive to survive one more minute, one more breath, one more contraction. Somewhere in the middle of it, she started talking, or maybe screaming. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. "I loved him," she gasped between pushes. "I loved him so much I thought it would kill me. Turns out I was right." The midwives said nothing. What could they say? Everyone in the palace knew the truth. Queen Seraphina Vale had married King Alaric 4 years ago, in a political arrangement between 2 great houses, and then committed the fatal mistake of actually falling in love with her husband. She had loved him through his indifference, through his long absences, Through the way, he looked past her at dinner like she was part of the furniture. And when Lady Eveline Marchand arrived at court 2 years ago, beautiful and sharp and utterly shameless, Serafina had loved him through that too. She told herself it was a phase, that Alaric would tire of his mistress and remember his queen. She told herself this even as Evelyn moved into the East Wing, even as the king stopped visiting Serafina's bed entirely, even as the whole court whispered and laughed behind their hands. The baby came in a rush of blood and fluid, tiny and wrinkled and howling with lungs that worked just fine. A boy. The heir. The whole reason for this marriage, this suffering, this slow death of Serafina's stupid, stubborn heart. Marjorie caught the baby and immediately started working, clearing his mouth and nose, checking his breathing. The younger midwife pressed cloths between Serafina's legs, trying to staunch the bleeding that would not stop. Serafina's head fell back against the pillow. Her whole body felt like it was coming apart, unspooling into nothing. She could barely see through the gray fog creeping in at the edges of her vision, but she could hear her son crying, and that was enough. "Is he alive?" she whispered. "He's perfect, Your Majesty." 10 fingers, 10 toes. Strong. Serafina closed her eyes. Good. That was good. The kingdom needed an heir, and now it had one. She had done her duty. She had given Alaric his son. Maybe now he would finally come see her. Maybe now she mattered. The thought was so pathetic it made her want to laugh again, but she did not have the strength. She felt herself drifting, felt the darkness getting closer. In the distance, she could hear Marjorie barking orders, the younger midwife sobbing, footsteps running. The royal physicians, probably. Coming to save her or watch her die, she was not sure which. Just before consciousness left her completely, Serafina heard a sound that cut through the fog like a knife. Laughter. Not in her room. Somewhere outside, drifting up from the palace gardens where the festival was in full swing. Music and laughter, and the sounds of people enjoying themselves while the queen bled out in her bed. She could picture it so clearly. Alaric on his throne, wine in hand, smiling at whatever clever thing Eveline had just whispered in his ear, not thinking about his wife at all. Something inside Serafina shifted in that moment, not her body. Her body was broken, maybe beyond repair. But something deeper, something in the core of who she was. The love did not die all at once. It died in pieces, in the spaces between her heartbeats as she lay there bleeding and alone. It died in the realization that she could be minutes from death and Alaric still would not come. It died in the understanding that she had wasted years of her life loving a man who saw her as an obligation, a duty, a means to an heir and nothing more. And in the place where that love had been, something else started to grow. Something cold and sharp and utterly merciless. If she survived this night, Serafina decided in her last conscious moment, she would never love King Alaric again. She would do something much more dangerous. She would stop caring whether he loved her back. Serafina woke 3 days later to sunlight streaming through windows. She did not remember opening and pain that made breathing feel like swallowing glass. Every part of her body hurt in new and inventive ways. Her abdomen felt like someone had taken a dull blade to her insides. Her head pounded. Even her teeth ached. But she was alive. The realization came slowly, swimming up through layers of fever dreams and laudanum haze. She was alive. Her son was alive. And King Alaric was sitting in a chair beside her bed, looking like he had not slept in days. For one disoriented moment, Serafina felt her traitorous heart lift. He had come. He was here. Maybe everything would be different now. Then she saw his face, really saw it and understood. He looked wrecked, guilty. His dark hair was disheveled, his fine clothes rumpled, and his eyes were red-rimmed in a way that suggested either tears or too much wine. Probably both. This was not the face of a husband who had rushed to his wife's side during her darkest hour. This was the face of a man who had shown up too late and knew it. "Serafina," Alaric breathed when he saw her eyes open. "Thank the gods. The physician said you might not wake up." His voice cracked on the last words, and he reached for her hand. Serafina moved her hand away. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable. Just a slight shift of her fingers against the sheets, pulling back from his touch. But Alaric froze like she had struck him. "Where were you?" Serafina said. Her voice came out hoarse and flat. 3 days of screaming had shredded her throat, But that was not why she sounded dead. She sounded dead because that was how she felt, hollowed out, emptied, like something vital had been scooped out of her chest and all that remained was the shell. Alaric's face crumpled. I was at the festival. I didn't know how bad it was. The messenger said you were in labor, but they didn't say you were dying. If I had known... You received 4 messages, Serafina interrupted. I sent 4. The last one explicitly said I was hemorrhaging, that the physicians thought I would not survive. What part of that did not seem urgent enough to interrupt your party? The words came out calm, too calm. That was what made them devastating. No tears, no shouting, just a simple question that cut straight to the bone. Alaric opened his mouth, closed it. He looked like a man drowning in air. I thought, he started, then stopped. His hands curled into fists against his thighs. I thought you would be fine. Women have babies every day. You're strong. You thought wrong. Serafina pushed herself up to sitting, ignoring the way the movement made her vision swim and fresh blood seep through her bandages. Alaric reached out to help her, but she waved him off. Where's my son? She asked. The prince is with the wet nurses. He's healthy, Serafina. Perfect. You did it. I did it, she repeated slowly. Yes, I did. Alone. You weren't alone. The midwives are not my husband. The silence that followed was the kind that shattered things. Alaric stared at her like he was seeing someone new, someone he did not recognize. Maybe he was. Serafina barely recognized herself. I'm sorry, Alaric said finally. The words sounded hollow. I should have been here. I know that. I'm sorry. Serafina looked at him for a long moment. This man she had loved so desperately. This man she had built fantasies around, imagining that one day he would wake up and see her, truly see her, and realize what he had. This man who had just apologized for abandoning her during childbirth, the way someone might apologize for being late to dinner. Are you, though? She said quietly. Are you actually sorry, or are you just uncomfortable with your guilt? Alaric flinched. I came as soon as I heard you were awake. You came 3 days late. I was here yesterday, and the day before. You were unconscious. Serafina smiled, and it was not a kind smile. So you did your duty. You sat vigil for the queen. How noble. Tell me, Alaric, was Lady Evelyn waiting for you when you left my chambers? Or did she have the decency to pretend she was not counting the minutes until you returned to her bed? The color drained from Alaric's face. That was confirmation enough. Serafina's smile widened, showing teeth. Get out. Serafina, please. I said get out. I am tired. I nearly died. I think I have earned the right to rest without looking at your face. Alaric stood slowly, like a man walking to his own execution. He looked at her with something that might have been regret or might have been relief that this conversation was ending. Hard to tell. We will talk when you are recovered, he said stiffly. About the future, about the prince, about us. There is no us, Serafina said. There is a queen and a king and a marriage contract. That is all there has ever been. I was just too stupid to see it. She turned her face away, presenting him with the side of her head, the universal gesture of dismissal. After a moment, she heard his footsteps cross the floor. The door opened, closed. Only then did Serafina let out the breath she had been holding. Only then did she let herself shake. Recovery was a slow, vicious process. The physicians said she was lucky to be alive. The bleeding had been severe, the tearing extensive. There was a possibility she would never carry another child, which should have devastated her but instead felt like relief. One son was enough. One reminder of the worst night of her life was plenty. She spent the first week barely able to move without help. The second week, she could walk from her bed to the window. By the third week, she insisted on seeing her son. They brought the baby to her chambers wrapped in silk, a tiny scrap of humanity with Alaric's dark hair and her gray eyes. He was so small, so fragile. Looking at him hurt in a way Serafina had not expected. Not because she did not love him, but because she did, fiercely and immediately. And that love made her vulnerable in ways she could not afford anymore. She held her son and made him a promise. No one will ever make you feel unwanted, she whispered against his soft head. No one will ever make you beg for affection. I swear it. The baby made a small noise and fell asleep in her arms, utterly trusting. Serafina felt something crack in her chest, some last piece of softness she thought she had killed. She let herself cry, just for a moment, just for him. Then she wiped her face and called for her advisors. If people were surprised that the queen wanted to discuss politics 3 weeks after nearly dying in childbed, they hit it well. Lord Cassian, her head of household, arrived first. He was an older man, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, loyal to the crown but not particularly loyal to the king. He had served Serafina's father before the marriage alliance, and he looked at her now with something like approval. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "you should be resting." "I have rested enough. Sit down, Cassian. We have work to do." She saw the moment he understood, the moment he realized that something fundamental had shifted in his queen. He sat without another word of protest. "I want a full accounting of the East Wing's expenses over the last 2 years," Serafina said crisply. "Every gown purchased for Lady Evelyn, every piece of jewelry, every private dinner. I want to know exactly how much of the royal treasury has been spent on the king's mistress." Cassian's eyebrows rose. "May I ask what you intend to do with this information?" Serafina smiled. "Not yet, but I want it ready. I also want a list of every noble family that has visited Lady Evelyn privately, everyone who has treated her like she has actual political power, every whisper of influence she has tried to wield." "That," Cassian said slowly, "is a dangerous path, Your Majesty. If the king discovers you are investigating his mistress, the king will discover nothing unless I want him to. Am I making myself clear?" Cassian studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Crystal clear, Your Majesty. I will begin immediately." Over the next month, Serafina rebuilt herself piece by piece, not into the woman she had been. That woman was dead. Into something new, something harder. She began taking meetings, first with her household staff, then with minor nobles, then with the military commanders who technically reported to the king but seemed increasingly interested in speaking with the queen instead. She asked questions, she listened, she learned who was loyal, who was corrupt, and who was simply waiting to see which way the wind blew. The palace whispered about the change in her. The soft-spoken queen who had spent 3 years smiling through humiliation had vanished. In her place was a woman who looked at people like she was calculating their usefulness, who spoke in clipped, efficient sentences, who never, ever mentioned her husband unless absolutely necessary. Alaric noticed, of course. How could he not? He tried to visit her chambers several times, always turned away by servants who informed him that the queen was indisposed. He sent gifts, flowers, a necklace that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. Serafina accepted them all with polite thank you notes that said nothing and felt like ice. The first time they were forced into the same room was at the christening of their son, 2 months after his birth. The entire court gathered in the great hall to witness the prince receive his name and blessing. Serafina wore red, a power move that made every woman in attendance whisper. Red was the color of the old queens, the warrior matriarchs who had ruled before the Valen kings consolidated power. No queen had worn red to a formal ceremony in 50 years. Serafina wore it like armor. She stood beside Alaric at the front of the hall, their son in the arms of the high priest, and felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her back. Judging, calculating, waiting to see if the queen who had been abandoned during childbirth would break under the scrutiny. She did not break. She stood spine straight and stone-faced while the priest droned through the traditional blessings. When it came time to announce the prince's name, Alaric cleared his throat. "The prince shall be called Marcus Alaric Vale, heir to the throne of Valen." Serafina's jaw tightened. They had never discussed the name. Alaric had simply decided. Of course he had. But she said nothing. Not here. Not in front of the court. She had learned something important over the last 2 months. Public scenes made you look weak. Cold calculation made you look dangerous. She would save her battles for private chambers where they would actually matter. The ceremony ended. The court flooded forward to offer congratulations. Serafina accepted them all with a smile that did not reach her eyes. And when Lady Evelyn Marchand approached, dressed in a gown that matched Alaric's formal robes in a way that was absolutely deliberate, Serafina's smile did not waver. "Lady Evelyn," she said pleasantly, "how kind of you to attend." Evelyn was beautiful in the way expensive things were beautiful. Perfect skin, perfect hair, perfect teeth behind a perfect smile. She looked at Serafina with eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. "I would not miss it for the world, Your Majesty. The prince is lovely. You must be so relieved that everything turned out well." The words were innocent on the surface. Underneath, they were poison. Everyone in the hall knew that Evelyn had been with Alaric the night Seraphina nearly died. Everyone knew she had not left his side even after the first messenger arrived. The implication was clear. Seraphina should be grateful to be alive at all. Grateful that Evelyn had allowed the king to eventually check on his dying wife. Seraphina's smile sharpened. "I am indeed relieved," she said softly. "Though I must admit there were moments during labor when I thought I might not survive. It is amazing what one thinks about in those moments. Who matters? Who does not?" Very clarifying. Evelyn's smile froze. The people close enough to overhear went very quiet. "I am sure the king was devastated to hear of your difficulties," Evelyn said, recovering quickly. "He has been beside himself with worry." "How strange," Seraphina said. "He seemed quite composed at the harvest festival. But perhaps I am misremembering. Blood loss does such funny things to the memory." The hall was silent now. Everyone watching. Everyone waiting to see if the queen would actually do this, actually challenge the king's mistress in open court. Alaric materialized at Seraphina's elbow, his hand closing around her wrist in a grip that looked gentle but felt like a vice. "Seraphina," he said quietly, "we should greet the foreign dignitaries." "Of course," Seraphina said. She looked at Evelyn one more time, still smiling. "Excuse me, Lady Evelyn. Do enjoy the refreshments." She let Alaric steer her away through the crowd, out onto a balcony where they were alone except for the guards, who pretended very hard not to listen. "What the hell was that?" Alaric hissed. Seraphina pulled her wrist free. "That was a conversation. Do you have a problem with me speaking to your mistress? Do not do this here, not in front of the entire court." "Do what, Your Majesty? Exist? Or did you expect me to spend the rest of my life cowering in my chambers while Lady Evelyn parades around as the true queen of this palace? You are being irrational." Seraphina laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. "I am being irrational. I nearly died alone while you celebrated with that woman, and I am the one being irrational. I have apologized for that. What more do you want from me?" "Nothing," Seraphina said flatly. "I want absolutely nothing from you anymore, Alaric. That is the point. You are free. Go back to your mistress. Shower her with jewels and attention. I do not care. You are my wife. I am your obligation." "There is a difference." She turned to go back inside, but Alaric grabbed her arm again. When she looked back at him, his face was desperate in a way she had never seen before. "I know I hurt you," he said. "I know I failed you. But you are still my queen. We still have to rule together. We still have a son. Please, Seraphina, can we not find some way forward?" Seraphina looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. For a moment, she saw the man she had fallen in love with 4 years ago. Handsome, proud, convinced that his charm could smooth over any problem, that apologies were enough, that she would forgive him because she always had before. But that was the old Seraphina, the woman who loved him. That woman was gone. "Take your hand off me," she said quietly. Alaric hesitated, then released her. "We will rule together because we must," Seraphina continued in the same quiet, lethal tone. "We will appear united in public because the kingdom requires it. But do not mistake duty for forgiveness, Alaric, and do not ever grab me like that again." She walked back inside, leaving him on the balcony. The whispers started that night and spread like wildfire through the palace. The queen had changed. The queen was not the gentle, lovesick girl they remembered. The queen was dangerous now. "Good," Seraphina thought when Cassian reported the gossip to her. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. Let them see that she was not a woman to be dismissed anymore. She had work to do. Fun. The investigation into Lady Evelyn's activities took 3 months. Cassian was thorough, and what he uncovered was worse than Seraphina had imagined. The mistress was not just expensive, she was actively corrupt. Evelyn had been accepting bribes from noble families seeking influence with the king. She had been selling appointments to minor positions. She had been funneling money from the royal treasury into private accounts through a network of corrupt officials. And most damning of all, she had been corresponding with foreign powers, offering information about Valen's military movements in exchange for promises of support should she ever need to flee the kingdom. It was treason, barely disguised, and the king either did not know or did not care. Seraphina read the reports in her private study, her hands shaking with rage. Not just because of the corruption, but because if Eveline had been doing this for 2 years, it meant Alaric had been too blinded by infatuation to notice that his mistress was actively undermining his kingdom. She called a private meeting with 3 people: Cassian, General Thorn, who commanded the palace guard, and Lady Helena Corvus, the only noblewoman in court who had openly supported Seraphina throughout her marriage. They gathered in her chambers after midnight, when the palace slept. "We have a problem," Seraphina said without preamble. She laid out the evidence, watched their faces turn grim. "If we bring this to the king," General Thorn said slowly, "he will not believe it. He will think you fabricated evidence out of jealousy." "I know," Seraphina said. "That is why we are not bringing it to the king. Not yet." "Then what do you propose?" Lady Helena asked. Seraphina smiled. It was not a nice smile. "I propose we give Lady Eveline exactly enough rope to hang herself with, and we make sure the entire kingdom is watching when she does." Over the next 2 months, Seraphina became a ghost in her own palace. She attended functions when required, smiled at the right people, spoke in polite generalities that revealed nothing. And beneath that surface, she laid traps. She let it slip to certain nobles that the queen was no longer as vigilant about corruption, that perhaps opportunities existed for those willing to approach the right people. Word reached Lady Eveline, of course. It always did. The mistress began getting bolder, taking larger bribes, making more obvious moves, and Seraphina documented everything. The breaking point came at the winter solstice, 6 months after Marcus's birth. The palace hosted a grand feast, and Seraphina wore white, the color of mourning. It was a message everyone understood, but no one could openly acknowledge. She sat beside Alaric at the high table and watched Lady Eveline hold court at the far end of the hall, surrounded by sycophants and corrupt officials who thought they had found their path to power. Alaric barely looked at Seraphina all night. His attention was fixed on Eveline, like it always was. Something inside Seraphina finally crystallized into perfect, terrible clarity. She did not need Alaric to love her. She did not need his attention or his affection or his approval. What she needed was his throne, or rather, the power that came with it. And there was more than one way to take power from a king too blind to use it properly. The next morning, she sent word to General Thorn. "Arrest Lady Eveline Marchand on charges of treason, embezzlement, and conspiracy against the crown. Do it publicly. Make sure everyone sees." And so the storm broke. The arrest happened at dawn, which was deliberate. Seraphina wanted the palace to wake up to the sound of soldiers marching through the east wing. She wanted the whole court to see Lady Eveline Marchand dragged from her chambers in nothing but a silk nightgown, her perfect hair wild, her perfect face twisted with rage and fear. General Thorn handled it personally. He was a man in his 50s, built like a war monument, with a face that had seen too many battlefields to be impressed by a mistress who thought sleeping with the king made her untouchable. He read the charges in a voice that carried through the marble corridors like a death sentence. "Lady Eveline Marchand, you are under arrest for high treason, embezzlement of crown funds, accepting bribes from foreign powers, and conspiracy to undermine the security of the Velen Empire. You will be held in the royal dungeons pending trial before the full council." Eveline did not go quietly. She screamed. She threatened. She invoked the king's name like it was a shield that could protect her from consequences. The soldiers did not care. They had their orders from the queen, countersigned by the Lord Commander of the Guard, and backed by evidence so damning that even the king's favor could not erase it. "Where is Alaric?" Eveline shrieked as they hauled her down the grand staircase. "Where is the king? He will stop this. He will stop all of you." "His Majesty has been informed," General Thorn said flatly. "He is reviewing the evidence as we speak." That was not entirely true. Alaric had been informed approximately 30 seconds before the arrest, when a messenger woke him with the news that his mistress was being taken into custody on the queen's orders. By the time he made it out of his chambers, half-dressed and wild-eyed, Eveline was already being marched across the courtyard in chains. The entire palace watched from windows and doorways. Servants, guards, nobles who had woken to the commotion and stumbled out to see what the noise was about. They all watched Lady Eveline Marchand, who had strutted through these halls for 2 years like she owned them, reduced to a prisoner in the space of 10 minutes. And they all saw King Alaric arrive too late to stop it. Seraphina watched from her balcony, 3 floors up, with her son in her arms. Marcus was awake and fussy, making small, unhappy noises against her shoulder. She bounced him gently and kept her eyes on the scene below. She felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not guilt, just a cold, crystalline certainty that this had been necessary. Alaric's voice echoed across the courtyard, raw with fury. "Stop. Stop this immediately. I command you to release her." General Thorne did not stop. He kept walking, Evelyn stumbling between two soldiers, heading toward the dungeon entrance on the far side of the palace grounds. Alaric broke into a run, reaching them just as they approached the iron gate. "I said stop!" Alaric roared. He grabbed Thorne's arm. "That is an order from your king." Thorne turned slowly. He was 6 inches taller than Alaric and twice as broad. When he spoke, his voice was respectful but immovable. "Your Majesty, I am following orders from the Queen, countersigned by the Lord Commander and supported by evidence of treason. If you wish to contest the arrest, you may do so before the Royal Council. Until then, the prisoner will be secured. I am the king. You answer to me." "I answer to the crown," Thorne corrected. "And the crown includes the Queen, especially when the Queen has evidence of crimes committed against the realm." He pulled his arm free from Alaric's grip and continued walking. The gate clanged shut behind them, swallowing Evelyn's screams. Alaric stood there staring at the iron bars like a man who had just watched his entire world collapse. Then he looked up. His eyes found Serafina on her balcony, 3 floors above. Even from that distance, she could see the rage and betrayal on his face. He looked at her like she had just driven a knife into his chest. Serafina looked back at him with the blank, pitiless expression she had practiced in the mirror for months. Then she turned and walked back inside, closing the balcony doors behind her. Let him stew. Let him rage. Let him feel a fraction of the abandonment she had felt the night she nearly died alone. She had work to do. The council meeting happened 4 hours later in the Great Hall, with every noble of significant rank crammed into the space. Serafina arrived early, dressed in midnight blue, her hair pulled back so severely it made her face look like a blade. She took her seat at the council table and arranged her evidence in neat stacks in front of her. Alaric arrived 10 minutes late, dressed in full royal regalia like he was preparing for war. Maybe he was. He looked at Serafina across the table with eyes that could have melted steel. "You had my mistress arrested," he said without preamble, "without consulting me, without my permission." "I had a traitor arrested," Serafina corrected, "and I do not need your permission to protect this kingdom from threats. Or did you forget that I am also a ruler of this empire? You overstepped. I did my job, something you have been too distracted to do for the last 2 years." The room went dead silent. No one spoke to the king like that. No one. But Serafina's voice was calm and her eyes were colder than winter, and every noble in the hall was suddenly very interested in whether the queen had actually lost her mind or if she knew exactly what she was doing. Alaric's jaw worked. "Explain yourself. Now." Serafina slid the first document across the table. "That is a record of 30,000 gold crowns transferred from the royal treasury to a private account under Lady Evelyn's control over the last 18 months. The transactions were authorized using forged signatures and falsified records. She stole from us, Alaric, from the crown, from the people." "That is a lie," Alaric said immediately. "Evelyn would never The second document. A list of noble families who paid bribes to Lady Evelyn in exchange for favorable appointments and influence over royal decisions. Some of those families are in this room right now." Several nobles suddenly became very interested in the floor. Serafina saw Lord Pemberton's face drain of color, saw Lady Ashford's hands tremble as she gripped the edge of her chair. "The third document," Serafina continued, sliding another page across the polished wood. "Correspondence between Lady Evelyn and the Duchy of Corvan, offering information about our military deployments in exchange for asylum should she need to flee. That is treason, Alaric. Textbook treason." "Those could be forgeries," Alaric said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "You could have fabricated all of this to get rid of her." Serafina smiled, and it was a terrible smile. "I thought you might say that. General Thorne, if you would." Thorne stepped forward from his position by the wall. He carried a locked box, which he set on the table and opened. Inside were letters in Evelyn's handwriting, sealed with her personal mark. He spread them out one by one. "These were found in Lady Evelyn's private chambers during the arrest," Thorne said. They corroborate everything in Her Majesty's evidence. Additionally, we have testimony from 3 servants who witnessed Lady Eveline meeting with foreign agents, and we have the merchant records showing the transfer of funds. Alaric stared at the letters like they were written in a language he did not understand. His face had gone gray. For the first time since Serafina had known him, he looked genuinely lost. "This cannot be real," he said quietly. "She would not do this." "She did," Serafina said. "For 2 years, while you were too infatuated to notice, she has been systematically looting the treasury and selling our kingdom's secrets. And you let her, because you were more interested in her bed than in actually ruling." The words landed like blows. Alaric flinched with each one. Around the table, nobles shifted uncomfortably. This was not how royalty spoke to each other in public. This was a wife eviscerating her husband in front of the entire court, and no one knew where to look. "I loved her," Alaric said, and his voice cracked on the words. Serafina's expression did not change. "I know. That is why she was able to betray you so completely. Love makes you blind. I learned that lesson the hard way." The silence that followed was suffocating. Alaric looked at Serafina like he was seeing her for the first time. Like the woman sitting across from him was a stranger wearing his wife's face. "What do you want?" he said finally. "Why bring this to the council? Why not just come to me privately?" "Because you would not have believed me. You would have thought I was jealous, vindictive, a scorned wife making up lies to destroy your happiness. So I made sure the evidence was so overwhelming that even you could not deny it. And I made sure the entire court was watching when the truth came out." She leaned forward, holding his gaze. "You humiliated me for 2 years, Alaric. You paraded your mistress in front of me. You let her disrespect me. You abandoned me on the night I nearly died, giving you an heir. Did you think there would be no consequences for that? Did you think I would just accept it forever?" Alaric's hands curled into fists on the table. "So this is revenge. This is justice. There is a difference." Lord Cassian cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should vote on the matter. All in favor of proceeding with a formal trial for Lady Eveline Marchand on the charges presented." Every hand in the room went up, some immediately, some reluctantly. But they all went up because the evidence was undeniable and because no one wanted to be seen defending a traitor. Alaric did not raise his hand. He sat there staring at the table, his face a mask of devastation. "The motion carries," Cassian announced. "Lady Eveline will stand trial in 1 week's time. Until then, she remains in custody. This council is adjourned." People filed out quickly, eager to escape the suffocating tension. Serafina gathered her documents with steady hands. She could feel Alaric's eyes on her, but she did not look up. Not until they were the only 2 left in the hall. "How long have you been planning this?" Alaric asked quietly. "Since the night you left me to die alone," Serafina said. "I had a lot of time to think while I was bleeding out. A lot of clarity about what actually mattered." She stood, smoothing her gown. "If you'll excuse me, I have a kingdom to run, something you might consider trying yourself." She walked out, her footsteps echoing in the empty hall. Behind her, she heard Alaric make a sound that might have been a sob or a curse. She did not look back. There was no room for mercy anymore. Not for him. Not for anyone who had ever underestimated her. The trial became the event of the decade. Nobles traveled from every corner of the empire to witness it. The hall was packed, standing room only, with people jostling for position to see the king's mistress face judgment. Eveline had been given a dress for the occasion, something plain and gray that made her look small and diminished. Her hair was still beautiful, her face still lovely, but the 2 weeks in the dungeon had stripped away the untouchable arrogance. She looked human now, frightened, desperate. She pleaded innocent to every charge, claimed the evidence was fabricated, claimed the queen had orchestrated everything out of jealousy. Her voice shook when she spoke, and tears streamed down her face, and Serafina watched it all with the detached interest of someone observing a play they had already seen a dozen times. The prosecution presented witness after witness, servants who had delivered the bribes, merchants who had facilitated the money transfers, a Corvani agent who had met with Eveline personally and was now cooperating in exchange for clemency. Each testimony was another nail in the coffin. Eveline's defense tried to argue that she had been manipulated, that the nobles had taken advantage of her naivety, that she had not understood the implications of her actions. It was a desperate strategy, and it failed spectacularly. On the third day of the trial, they called King Alaric to testify. He looked like he had not slept in weeks. His face was haggard, his eyes hollow. He took the stand and swore his oath, and the entire hall leaned forward to hear what he would say. "Your Majesty," the prosecutor began carefully, "you maintained an intimate relationship with the accused for approximately 2 years. During that time, did you notice any unusual behavior? Any meetings with questionable individuals? Any sudden wealth that seemed disproportionate to her station?" Alaric's hands gripped the arms of the witness chair. "No, I noticed nothing. Did Lady Evelyn ever discuss matters of state with you? Military movements, council decisions, treasury allocations? We talked about many things. Did she ever ask specific questions about sensitive information?" "Sometimes. I thought she was interested in my work. I thought she cared." His voice broke on the last word. The hall was silent except for the scratch of court scribes documenting every word. "Did you ever suspect she might be using that information for purposes other than personal interest?" the prosecutor pressed. "No. I trusted her. I loved her. I believed she loved me back." The prosecutor let that statement hang in the air for a long moment. "And now, Your Majesty, with the evidence before you, do you still believe that?" Alaric looked at Evelyn. She stared back at him with desperate eyes, silently begging him to save her, to use his power as king to make this all go away. Alaric looked away. "No, I do not believe that anymore." Evelyn made a sound like something dying. Alaric kept his eyes on the floor. "No further questions," the prosecutor said. When the verdict came, it was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. The sentence was exile, stripped of all titles and property, forbidden from ever returning to Valin on pain of death. It was a mercy, really. In earlier eras, she would have been executed, but Seraphina had argued for exile instead, not out of kindness, but out of calculation. A living reminder of the consequences of betrayal was more useful than a dead martyr. They took Evelyn away, screaming. She cursed the queen, cursed the court, cursed Alaric for his cowardice. Her voice echoed through the hall even after the guards dragged her out, fading into the distance like a ghost. Seraphina sat through it all with a face like carved marble. When it was over and the hall began to empty, she remained in her seat, waiting. Alaric approached slowly, like a man walking through ruins. He stood in front of her for a long moment before speaking. "Are you satisfied?" he asked. "I am efficient," Seraphina corrected. "There is a difference. She was a threat to the kingdom. I eliminated her. That is what rulers do. You destroyed her. She destroyed herself. I simply made sure everyone saw it happen." Alaric shook his head slowly. "I do not recognize you anymore. The woman I married would never have done this." Seraphina stood, meeting his eyes. "The woman you married died on the night you abandoned her. I am what survived." She walked past him, her shoulder brushing his, and felt him flinch at the contact like she had burned him. Good. Let him remember what it felt like to be touched by someone who no longer cared. Outside the hall, Lady Helena was waiting with a carriage. The older woman looked at Seraphina with something like awe. "That was brutal," Helena said quietly. "Absolutely brutal. Are you all right?" "I am fine," Seraphina said. She climbed into the carriage and settled against the cushions. "How is Marcus?" "Sleeping peacefully with the nurses. He does not have a care in the world." Seraphina closed her eyes. "Let us keep it that way. No child should have to witness what their mother becomes when survival requires savagery." The carriage rolled through the streets toward the palace. Citizens lined the roads, and when they saw the queen's carriage, they cheered. Word of the trial had spread fast, and the people loved it. The queen who had been humiliated and abandoned had risen up and struck down the corrupt mistress who had stolen from them all. It was a story they could believe in. Seraphina waved from the window, smiling the smile she had practiced until it looked genuine. Inside, she felt nothing, just the cold satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly and the bone-deep exhaustion that came after. When they reached the palace, she went straight to the nursery. Marcus was indeed sleeping, tiny fists curled against his chest, completely oblivious to the empire-shaking events of the day. Seraphina stood over his cradle and watched him breathe. "I did it for you," she whispered, "so you would inherit a kingdom worth ruling, so you would never have to watch your mother beg for scraps of affection from a man too blind to see her worth." The baby slept on, dreaming whatever babies dreamed. The months after the trial were strange. The palace settled into a new rhythm, one where the queen held real power and everyone knew it. Nobles who had ignored Serafina for years suddenly sought audiences with her. Military commanders reported to her as often as to the king. Even the treasury officials started bringing their budgets to her first, knowing she would actually read them instead of signing off blindly. Alaric tried to reclaim his authority, but it was like trying to hold water. He had been exposed as a king who let his mistress steal from his own people, who had been so blinded by infatuation that he missed a conspiracy happening under his nose. The court respected power, and right now the queen had more of it than he did. Their marriage became a performance. They appeared together at state functions, stood side by side at ceremonies, presented a united front to foreign dignitaries. But in private, they barely spoke. When they did, the conversations were cold and transactional. Budget allocations, military appointments, which noble families needed to be brought to heel. Never anything personal, never anything real. One night, 6 months after the trial, Alaric came to her chambers. It was late, past midnight, and Serafina was at her desk reviewing reports from the border provinces. She looked up when he entered, surprised. He had not been to her chambers since before Marcus was born. "We need to talk," Alaric said. Serafina set down her pen. "About what?" "About us. About this marriage. About what happens now." "Nothing happens now. We continue as we have been. Ruling, raising our son, fulfilling our duties to the kingdom. That is not a marriage, Serafina. That is a business arrangement." Serafina looked at him steadily. "What did you think this was, Alaric? You married me for an alliance. I married you because my father commanded it. We made a child because the empire needed an heir. Where in any of that was there supposed to be love? There was for you. You loved me. I know you did." Past tense. "Yes, I did. And you took that love and crumpled it up and threw it away because it was inconvenient. Because a beautiful woman smiled at you, and you decided that was more important than honoring your vows." "I made a mistake," Alaric said. "A terrible mistake. But I'm trying to make it right. I dismissed the corrupt officials Eveline brought in. I restructured the treasury oversight. I have been ruling the way I should have from the beginning. Does none of that matter? It matters for the kingdom, not for us." Alaric moved closer, and Serafina saw genuine desperation in his eyes. "What do you want from me, Serafina? Tell me what I can do to fix this. I will do anything. You cannot fix it. Some things, once broken, do not mend. I do not accept that." Serafina laughed, short and bitter. "Of course you do not. You are a king. You are used to getting what you want, but you cannot command me to love you again, Alaric. That is not how hearts work. Then what? We just live like strangers for the rest of our lives. If that is what it takes, yes. I will not pretend to feel things I do not feel just to make you comfortable." Alaric stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. The king who had always been able to charm his way out of consequences, who had never met a problem he could not smooth over with apologies and gifts, was finally facing something he could not manipulate. "I loved Eveline," he said quietly, "but I am starting to realize I never really knew her. She was a fantasy, a beautiful lie, I told myself. But you, Serafina, you are real. You are strong and brilliant, and you saved this kingdom when I was too stupid to see it needed saving. I was wrong about everything, about you, about what mattered. And I know I do not deserve forgiveness, but I am asking anyway. Please, give me a chance to prove I can be the husband you deserved from the beginning." Serafina felt something twist in her chest. Not her heart. That was still dead. But something else. Maybe pity. Maybe exhaustion. She had spent so much energy on rage that she was not sure what to do now that he was finally saying the things she had once desperately wanted to hear. But she was not the same woman who wanted those things anymore. "It is too late," she said softly. "You killed the woman who would have forgiven you. What is left of me does not know how." Alaric's face crumpled. "I do not believe that. You are not made of stone, Serafina. Somewhere inside, the woman I married still exists. Maybe, but she will never belong to you again." She turned back to her desk, picking up her pen. The conversation was over. Alaric stood there for another moment, waiting for something, some crack in her armor. When it did not come, he left without another word. Serafina listened to his footsteps fade down the corridor. Then she set down her pen and pressed her palms flat against the desk, breathing slowly. Her hands were shaking. She hated that they were shaking, hated that he could still affect her even now, but she would not cry. She had promised herself that night in the birthing bed that she was done crying over King Alaric Vale. And she kept her promises. The real turning point came 3 months later during a routine inspection of the royal nursery. Serafina was playing with Marcus, who was nearly a year old now and starting to babble nonsense syllables that might someday become words. He laughed when she made faces at him, grabbed at her hair with sticky fingers, completely unaware that he was the heir to an empire built on blood and compromise. One of the junior nurses, a girl named Claire who was new to the palace, brought in the afternoon meal. She set it down carefully and then hesitated, wringing her hands. "Your Majesty," Claire said nervously, "may I speak freely?" Serafina looked up, surprised. "Of course." The girl took a breath. "I just wanted to say the whole staff admires you. What you did with Lady Evelyn, how you have managed everything. Most of us come from common families, and we all know someone who was hurt by the corruption. You made it stop. You made things better, and we are grateful." Serafina blinked. She had not expected this, had not realized that her war with Evelyn had been about more than personal vengeance, that it had actually meant something to the people who served in the palace. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That is kind of you to say." "My mother works in the textile district," Claire continued, gaining confidence. "She said after Lady Evelyn was exiled, the bribes stopped. The foremen stopped skimming wages. Things got a little easier, because you made them afraid to be corrupt. You showed them the crown was watching again." The girl curtsied and left quickly, like she had said too much. Serafina sat there holding Marcus, feeling something shift inside her chest. Not softness, but purpose. Clarity. She had thought she was destroying Evelyn out of rage and hurt pride, but the truth was more complicated. She had been protecting something, not just herself, but the kingdom. The people who depended on the crown to be something other than a den of thieves. Maybe that was enough. Maybe she did not need to be loved by Alaric to matter. Maybe being feared and respected was actually more valuable. Marcus grabbed her nose and laughed. Serafina kissed his forehead and made a decision. She would stop trying to bury the woman she used to be. That woman was part of her history, part of how she had gotten to this moment. But she would also stop mourning what she had lost. The love, the innocence, the foolish belief that marriage could be anything other than a strategic alliance with occasional tenderness. She would be the queen this kingdom needed, cold when necessary, ruthless when required, but fair, always fair. And if that meant living the rest of her life with a heart that never fully healed, so be it. There were worse fates than being powerful and alone. That night, there was another state dinner. Another performance of marital unity for the benefit of visiting dignitaries. Serafina dressed in emerald green, a color that made her look like winter-made flesh. She wore her crown for the first time in months, a circlet of white gold that caught the light like ice. When she entered the dining hall, conversation stopped. Everyone turned to look at her, not with pity anymore, with respect, with the kind of careful wariness people reserved for things that could hurt them if provoked. Alaric was already seated at the head table. He stood when she approached, offering his hand to help her into her chair. It was a small gesture, courtly and expected. Serafina took his hand, let him assist her, released him as soon as she was seated. They made it through the meal with practiced ease, smiling at the right moments, making polite conversation with the foreign ambassadors, playing the role of united sovereigns so well that no one would guess the marriage was a corpse propped up for appearances. But halfway through dessert, something happened. A messenger burst into the hall, breathless and wild-eyed. He ran straight to General Thorne, whispered urgently in his ear. Thorne's face went hard. He stood and walked quickly to the high table, leaning between Serafina and Alaric. "Your Majesties, we have a situation. There has been an incident in the East Wing, an assassination attempt." Serafina's blood went cold. Marcus. The nursery was in the East Wing. She was on her feet before Thorne finished speaking, already moving toward the door. Alaric was right behind her, both of them running through the palace corridors with guards scrambling to keep up. They burst into the nursery to find it swarming with soldiers, the nurses huddled in a corner, and General Thorne's second-in-command holding a struggling figure in custody. Marcus was crying in Marjorie's arms, red-faced but unharmed. Seraphina went straight to him, took him from the midwife, held him against her chest until her own heartbeat slowed enough to think, "He is all right. He is safe." Nothing else mattered. "What happened?" Alaric demanded. The soldier shoved the prisoner forward. This woman was caught attempting to access the prince's chambers. She had poison on her person, nightshade extract, enough to kill a grown man, let alone a child. Seraphina looked at the prisoner. Her blood turned to ice. It was Lady Ashford's personal maid, one of the women whose family had paid bribes to Lady Evelyn. One of the names on Seraphina's list. The pieces clicked together with terrible clarity. "Who sent you?" Seraphina said, her voice deadly calm. The maid spat at her feet. "You ruined everything. You destroyed families who were just trying to survive." Lady Evelyn understood that sometimes you have to take what you can get. But you self-righteous piece of trash, you think you are better than everyone else. "Answer the question," Alaric said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "Who sent you to murder my son?" The maid smiled, and it was ugly. "No one sent me. I came on my own. Because you took everything from my lady, so I thought I would take something from you." Seraphina felt the rage rising in her chest like a living thing, hot and vicious and demanding blood. She handed Marcus to Marjorie without looking away from the would-be assassin. "You tried to kill my child," she said softly. "He is just another noble brat. The world would not miss him." Seraphina moved before anyone could stop her. She crossed the room in 3 strides and backhanded the woman so hard the crack echoed. The maid's head snapped to the side, blood spattering from her split lip. "Take her to the dungeon," Seraphina said, "and find everyone who helped her, every single person who knew about this and said nothing. I want them all in chains by morning." The guards dragged the woman away. The moment she was gone, Seraphina's knees buckled. Alaric caught her, held her up, and for a moment they stood there clinging to each other like the world was ending. "He is safe," Alaric said into her hair. "He is safe. We stopped it." "Barely," Seraphina choked out. "We barely stopped it. If she had gotten 5 minutes earlier, if the guards had been slower, But they were not. He is alive. That is all that matters." Seraphina pulled back, looking up at Alaric with eyes that were finally wet. "This is not over. Evelyn's supporters are still out there, still angry, still looking for revenge. Our son will never be safe as long as they exist." "Then we root them out," Alaric said fiercely. "All of them. Every corrupt noble, every traitor, everyone who thought they could threaten our family. We burn it all down and start over." For the first time in a year, Seraphina saw the man she had once imagined Alaric could be. Strong, focused, willing to do what was necessary. It was not love that rekindled in her chest, but it was something. Partnership, maybe. Common purpose. She nodded slowly. "Together, then. Together." They stood there in the nursery, surrounded by guards and frightened servants, holding their son between them, and made a silent vow. The gloves were off now. No more mercy, no more half measures. Anyone who threatened their family would learn what happened when you backed a mother into a corner and left her no choice but to become a monster. The purge began at dawn, systematic and merciless. Seraphina personally oversaw the interrogation, sitting in the cold stone chamber beneath the palace, while General Thorne and his men extracted confessions from anyone connected to the assassination attempt. She did not flinch when they screamed, did not look away when they broke. This was what power required when survival was no longer negotiable. Lady Ashford crumbled first. The noblewoman who had paid bribes to Evelyn wept as she admitted she had known about the maid's plan, but said nothing because she feared being implicated in the earlier corruption. She swore she never thought the girl would actually go through with it, swore she would have stopped it if she had known it was real. Seraphina listened to every word with a face carved from ice. When Lady Ashford finished, sobbing into her hands, the Queen spoke in a voice that could freeze blood. "You knew someone planned to murder my infant son, and you stayed silent. That makes you complicit. The sentence is exile. You have 48 hours to leave the empire. If you are found within our borders after that, you will hang." The woman was dragged away shrieking. Serafina moved on to the next interrogation without pause. Over the next week, 17 nobles were exiled. 4 were imprisoned for active conspiracy. 2 lower-level officials were hanged in the public square as a message that treason carried consequences no title or family name could erase. The executions drew massive crowds. The people cheered when the trapdoors opened. Serafina watched from a palace window, Marcus sleeping against her shoulder, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Let them see. Let them understand that the queen who had once been gentle and forgiving was gone. What remained was something that would burn the world to ash before allowing harm to touch her child. Alaric stood beside her, his face grim. "We are making enemies," he said quietly. "These families have deep roots, powerful connections. They will not forgive this." "Good," Serafina said. "Let them hate me. As long as they fear me more, we will be safe." Alaric looked at her with something that might have been concern or might have been recognition that he had helped create this. The woman beside him now, hard and unyielding, was partially his fault. His neglect had killed the soft parts of her. What grew in their place was efficient and ruthless and utterly uncompromising. He did not know if he should be proud or terrified. Over the following months, Serafina restructured the entire palace administration. She replaced corrupt officials with people loyal to the crown, not to individual nobles. She installed new treasury oversight, new military reporting chains, new laws that made bribery and embezzlement capital offenses. The changes were brutal and swift, leaving no time for resistance to organize. The court adapted because they had no choice. Those who could not adapt found themselves stripped of influence and shuffled to distant estates where they could rot in irrelevance. And through it all, Serafina felt something shift in her relationship with Alaric. Not love. That was still dead. But a kind of mutual respect forged in shared purpose. They worked together now, genuinely together, making decisions as partners rather than as king and discarded queen. He asked her opinion on military deployments. She consulted him on diplomatic negotiations. They stood united in council meetings, presenting a front so seamless that observers could almost forget the marriage had nearly shattered a year ago. Almost. But late at night, when the palace slept and they returned to their separate chambers, the distance remained. Alaric still sometimes looked at her like he was trying to find the woman he had married. Serafina looked back at him like a stranger she was contractually obligated to tolerate. It was functional, it was cold. It was the best they could manage, until everything fell apart. Chishatik. The letter arrived on a morning that started like any other. Serafina was in her study reviewing grain distribution reports when Lord Cassian entered with an expression she had never seen on his face before. He looked shaken, which was alarming because Cassian never looked shaken. He had weathered palace coups and border wars without breaking a sweat. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "we have received intelligence from our spies in Corvan. You need to see this immediately." He handed her a sealed document. Serafina broke the wax and read, and with each line her blood turned colder. It was a detailed report of communications between the Corvani Duke and someone inside the Vallon court. Recent communications. Ongoing communications. The letters discussed military movements, weaknesses in the border defenses, and specific details about the palace guard rotations. Someone was still selling secrets to their enemies even after Eveline's exile. Serafina's hands tightened on the paper. "Who?" she said flatly. "Who is the traitor?" Cassian's face was gray. The spy could not confirm the identity, but the letters are signed with a seal, the same seal used by someone with access to the highest levels of the court. "Show me." He handed her a sketch of the seal impression. Serafina stared at it, her mind racing through possibilities. It was a simple design, a falcon with spread wings, but she recognized it. She had seen it 1,000 times over the years. It was the personal seal of the king's privy council. Only 5 people in the entire empire had access to that seal: the king, the queen, the lord commander, the high chancellor, and the master of coin. One of those 5 was a traitor. Serafina felt the ground shift beneath her feet. After everything they had done to purge corruption, after all the blood and exile and restructuring, the rot went deeper than she had imagined. Someone in the inner circle, someone they trusted completely, was actively working to destroy them. "Who has access to the privy seal?" she asked, though she already knew. Cassian recited the list. "Your Majesty, His Majesty the King, Lord Commander Thorne, High Chancellor Pemberton, Master of Coin Graves. Each name was a person she had worked with daily, people she relied on, people who helped run the empire. One of them wanted her family dead. I want them all investigated, Serafina said, quietly. No one can know we suspect anything. Watch their movements, their correspondence, their spending, everything. Your Majesty, Cassian said carefully, one of those names is the king. Serafina met his eyes. I said everyone, no exceptions. Cassian bowed and left. Serafina sat alone in her study, staring at the letter, feeling the weight of paranoia settle over her like a shroud. She had thought she was building something secure, thought she had rooted out the threats. But power was like trying to hold smoke. The tighter you gripped, the more it slipped through your fingers. She could not even trust the people closest to her anymore. Back. The investigation took 3 weeks, and every day of it was agony. Serafina went through the motions of court life while her spies watched the 5 people with access to the Privy Seal. She smiled at state dinners while wondering if the man pouring her wine was planning her assassination. She held council meetings while calculating which of her advisors might be the viper in her nest. And she said nothing to Alaric. That was the hardest part. They were supposed to be partners now, united against threats. But his name was on the list of suspects, and until she could clear him, she could not risk tipping her hand. So she kept the investigation secret and felt the distance between them widen again into a chasm. Alaric noticed something was wrong. He asked her about it one evening when they were alone in the royal apartments, reviewing reports before bed. You have been distant, he said. More than usual. What is going on? Nothing. I am tired. Serafina, I know you well enough now to know when you are hiding something. Talk to me. She looked at him, this man who had failed her so catastrophically, and then slowly, painfully, started trying to be better. This man who might still be betraying her to their enemies. It is nothing you need to worry about, she said. Just administrative matters. Alaric's jaw tightened. We agreed to be partners. That means trusting each other. Trust, Serafina thought bitterly, was a luxury she could not afford. Not anymore. Not when the cost of misplaced trust could be her son's life. I trust you to do your job, she said evenly, as I do mine. That is partnership enough. She left before he could argue, walking quickly to her chambers and locking the door behind her. She pressed her back against the wood and closed her eyes, breathing slowly. She was so tired. Tired of suspicion. Tired of fighting. Tired of being the only person she could rely on. But she could not stop. Stopping meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant death. The break in the case came 4 days later. One of Cassian's spies followed Master of Coin Graves to a tavern in the lower city, a place no palace official had any business visiting. Graves met with a cloaked figure in a back room, handed over a sealed letter, and received a pouch of gold in return. The spy waited until Graves left, then intercepted the cloaked figure. Under interrogation, the courier admitted he worked for Corvani Intelligence. The letter he carried detailed the palace guard's shift changes and the Queen's travel schedule for the next month. They arrested Graves at midnight. Serafina insisted on being present for the interrogation personally. The Master of Coin was a thin man in his 50s, nervous and sweating even before they dragged him into the stone chamber beneath the palace. When he saw the Queen waiting for him, his face went the color of old parchment. Your Majesty, he stammered, there has been a mistake. I do not know what you think I have done, but... We have the courier, Serafina interrupted coldly. We have the letter you gave him. We have witnesses who saw you accept payment. Do not insult me by pretending innocence. Graves's mouth opened and closed. He looked like a fish drowning in air. Why? Serafina asked. You were well paid, well respected. Why betray your kingdom for Corvani gold? The man's face crumpled. I had debts, gambling debts. They were going to kill my family if I did not pay. The Corvani offered me a way out. It was supposed to be small things, minor information. I never thought it would go this far. Small things, Serafina repeated softly. You sold intelligence that could get soldiers killed. That could get my son killed. And you call that small. I am sorry, Graves wept. I am so sorry. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I was just trying to survive. Serafina stood and walked to where he knelt on the cold stone floor. She looked down at him with eyes that held no pity whatsoever. "Everyone is trying to survive," she said. "The difference is some of us do it without selling out the people who trust us." She turned to General Thorne. "He is guilty of high treason. The sentence is death. Carry it out at dawn." Graves started screaming, begging for mercy, swearing he would do anything to make it right. Serafina walked out and left him to his fate. She felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not regret, just the cold certainty that she had done what needed doing. One threat eliminated. But the paranoia remained because Graves had been part of the inner circle and she had never suspected him. If he could fool her, who else might be? She went to the nursery and held Marcus until the trembling in her hands stopped. The baby cooed at her, happy and oblivious. She envied him that innocence. The execution was public, another message to the court that treason meant death. Serafina watched from the palace balcony with Alaric beside her. When the blade fell, she did not look away. Alaric did. He turned his head, his face troubled. "That is the third execution in 6 months," he said quietly. "The court is terrified of you. Good. Serafina, this cannot continue. Ruling through fear only works until someone decides they have nothing left to lose. Then we make sure they always have something left to lose," she said. "Family, wealth, position. Give them enough comfort that rebellion seems too costly. That is a dangerous game. Everything about ruling is dangerous. At least this way we control the board." Alaric looked at her like he was seeing a stranger. "Sometimes I wonder if destroying Evelyn destroyed part of you too," he said. "The part that knew how to be merciful." Serafina turned to face him fully. "Mercy is a luxury we cannot afford when people keep trying to kill our son. If you have a problem with my methods, you are welcome to offer alternatives. Until then, I will do what is necessary." She left him on the balcony and went to the council chamber, where she had work waiting. Always more work, more threats to neutralize, more corruption to root out, more enemies to destroy before they destroyed her. She was so focused on external threats that she never saw the blade coming from inside her own house. It happened 3 weeks after Graves's execution. Serafina was in the throne room hearing petitions from minor nobles when Lord Cassian entered looking shaken again, the same expression he had worn when he brought news of the Corvani spy. Serafina's stomach dropped. She dismissed the petitioners and met Cassian in a private antechamber. "What now?" she asked. Cassian handed her another document. "Your Majesty, our investigators found something while going through Graves's personal effects." A second set of correspondence. Not with Corvan, with someone else. Serafina read the letter and felt the world tilt sideways. It was a message from Graves to an unnamed contact inside the palace, discussing not military intelligence, but something far more personal. Plans for the assassination attempt on Marcus, details about the maid's access to the East Wing, confirmation that the poison had been acquired and delivered. Graves had not just been selling military secrets. He had been actively involved in the conspiracy to murder the prince. But that was not the part that made Serafina's blood turn to ice. At the bottom of the letter, written in Graves's own hand, was a line that changed everything. "As agreed with our mutual friend, the prince's death will clear the succession for the alternative line. Once the queen is discredited and removed, your claim will be uncontested." Alternative line. Claim to the throne. There was only one person in the palace with a potential claim to the throne if Marcus died and Serafina was removed. Prince Lysander, Alaric's younger brother. Serafina's hands went numb. Lysander had been nothing but supportive since the assassination attempt. He visited Marcus regularly, played the doting uncle, offered political advice. She had trusted him completely because he was family, because he seemed to genuinely care. But if Graves was telling the truth, Lysander had been orchestrating everything. The assassination attempt, the continued leaks to Corvan, all of it designed to destabilize Alaric's rule and position himself as the rightful heir. "Where is Lysander now?" Serafina asked, her voice deadly calm. "In the training yards, I believe. Shall I have him detained?" Serafina's mind raced. If they arrested Lysander without absolute proof, it would split the court. Half the nobles liked him better than Alaric anyway. They would call it a power grab, accuse Serafina of paranoia, maybe even rally behind Lysander as a martyr. She needed more evidence. needed Lysander to incriminate himself beyond any doubt. "No," she said slowly. "Do not detain him. But I want him watched every second, every meeting, every conversation. And bring me anything else you can find in Graves's effects. There has to be more." Cassian bowed and left. Seraphina stood alone in the antechamber, feeling the walls close in. She had thought she was fighting external enemies, corrupt officials, foreign spies. She never imagined the real threat was Alaric's own brother, someone who sat at their dinner table and smiled while plotting their destruction. The worst part was she could not tell Alaric. Not yet. Lysander was his little brother, the only family he had left after their parents died. Alaric would never believe it without irrefutable proof. He would think Seraphina was paranoid, seeing conspiracies everywhere, becoming the tyrant the court whispered she was turning into. So once again, she was alone, carrying the weight of secrets that could shatter the kingdom if revealed too soon. She went through the rest of the day in a haze, smiling when required, making decisions, pretending everything was normal. But inside, her mind was calculating, planning, preparing for the moment when she would have to destroy the last piece of family Alaric had. Because if Lysander was truly behind the assassination attempt, he had tried to murder her son, and for that, there could be no forgiveness, no mercy, no matter whose brother he was. That night, Alaric came to her chambers. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, tension in every line of his body. He sat on the edge of her bed without asking permission, which told her how rattled he was. "I heard about what you found in Graves's quarters," he said, "the connection to the assassination attempt." Word traveled fast. Seraphina kept her face neutral. "Yes, he was more involved than we initially thought." "Do you think there are others?" Alaric asked. "More conspirators we have not found yet." Seraphina chose her words carefully. "I think we have to assume the conspiracy went deeper than one corrupt official. We need to be vigilant." Alaric rubbed his face with both hands. "I am so tired of this, of suspecting everyone, of wondering which smile hides a knife. I just want to trust someone without calculating the cost." "Trust is expensive," Seraphina said quietly. "We learned that the hard way." He looked at her, and for a moment his guard dropped completely. "I know I destroyed your ability to trust me. I know I earned that. But I need you to know, Seraphina, whatever else I have done wrong, I am on your side now, on our son's side. If there are more threats, we face them together." Seraphina felt something crack inside her chest. He meant it. She could see it in his eyes. He was finally, genuinely trying to be the partner she had needed years ago. And she could not tell him that the biggest threat was his own brother. "I know," she lied. "We are in this together." Alaric reached for her hand. She let him take it, felt his fingers close around hers, warm and solid. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a trap closing around her because the moment she told him about Lysander, this fragile alliance would shatter. She was going to have to choose between protecting her son and protecting Alaric from the truth. It was not really a choice at all. Shulk. The final evidence came 3 days later. Cassian's people found a hidden compartment in Graves's desk containing letters written in Lysander's own hand. Instructions for the assassination. Promises of power and position once Marcus was dead and Seraphina was broken. Plans for how to frame the whole thing as the Queen's paranoid purge spinning out of control. It was all there. Every damning detail, proof so absolute that even Alaric could not deny it. Seraphina read the letters in her private study, with her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold the pages. Lysander had not just planned to kill Marcus. He had planned to destroy Seraphina politically, paint her as a mad tyrant who saw conspiracies everywhere, and then step in as the reasonable alternative to save the kingdom from her instability. It was brilliant, vicious, and it had almost worked. She called an emergency meeting of the Privy Council for that evening. Only the most trusted people, General Thorne, Lord Cassian, High Chancellor Pemberton, and the king. She did not tell anyone what the meeting was about. When they assembled in the private council chamber, Seraphina laid out everything: the letters, the conspiracy, the proof that Prince Lysander had orchestrated the attempt on Marcus's life. The room went silent. Pemberton looked like he might be sick. Thorne's hand went to his sword instinctively, and Alaric just stared at the letters spread across the table like they were written in a language he could not read. No, he said finally. No, this is a mistake. Lysander would not do this. The handwriting is his, Seraphina said quietly. The seal is his. The details match everything we know about the conspiracy. Then it is a forgery. Someone is trying to frame him. Why would anyone do that? He has no real power, no threat, unless he was actually planning to take power. Alaric stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. You are wrong. You have to be wrong. He is my brother. He tried to kill our son. You do not know that. I know exactly that, Seraphina said, her voice rising. I have the proof right here. Stop being blind, Alaric. Stop letting your feelings cloud your judgment. This is what happened with Eveline, and look where that got us. Do not, Alaric said, his voice shaking with rage. Do not compare my brother to her. She was a stranger. He is family. Family who wants your throne badly enough to murder a baby to get it. The words hung in the air like poison. Alaric looked at her with betrayal written across every feature, and Seraphina saw the moment their fragile partnership shattered into pieces. I will not do this, Alaric said. I will not let you execute my brother based on letters that could have been fabricated by anyone with access to his chambers. Then you are choosing him over your own son, Seraphina said coldly, because if you do not act, I will. You will do nothing, Alaric said. That is an order from your king. He walked out, slamming the door hard enough to shake the walls. The remaining council members sat frozen, looking anywhere but at the queen. Seraphina stood slowly, gathering the evidence with steady hands. Her face was a mask, revealing nothing of the screaming void inside her. General Thorn, she said calmly, place Prince Lysander under house arrest immediately. No visitors, no correspondence. Guard him with men loyal to the crown, not to the king. If His Majesty attempts to interfere, you will respectfully inform him that I invoked my right as co-regent to protect the heir. Your Majesty, Thorn said carefully, if you do this, it will be civil war. Half the court will side with the king. You will be fighting your own husband. Then that is what I will do, Seraphina said, because I will not let my son die to spare anyone's feelings, not even the king's. She walked out of the council chamber with her head high and her heart in pieces, knowing she had just crossed a line from which there was no return. The palace split down the middle within hours of Lysander's arrest. By midnight, half the guard had declared loyalty to the king, while the other half followed General Thorn's orders to protect the queen and heir. Nobles scrambled to choose sides, calculating which monarch would come out on top and making their allegiances accordingly. The servants whispered in corners, terrified that the empire was about to tear itself apart from the inside. Seraphina stood in this war room with maps spread across the table, marking positions of loyal forces versus those siding with Alaric. General Thorn stood beside her, his face grim as he tallied numbers. We have the palace guard and most of the military commanders, he said, but the king has the nobility and the city watch. If this turns into actual fighting, the capital will burn. Then we make sure it does not turn into fighting, Seraphina said. We end this before it begins. How do you propose we do that, Your Majesty? The king will not back down, not when it is his brother's life at stake. Seraphina stared at the map, at the little markers representing thousands of lives that would be destroyed if she miscalculated. She had spent a year learning that power meant making choices no sane person wanted to make, that survival required becoming something harder than the world trying to break you. She had thought she understood that lesson, but standing here, preparing to potentially fight her own husband in the streets, she realized there were depths of ruthlessness she had not yet reached, places inside herself she had hoped never to visit. Turned out hope was another luxury she could not afford. We force Lysander to confess publicly, she said, in front of the full court. Let him condemn himself with his own words. Then even Alaric cannot deny the truth. And if he refuses to confess? Thorn asked. Seraphina's smile was cold and sharp as a blade. Everyone breaks eventually. We just have to find the right pressure point. Achram. They brought Lysander to the throne room at dawn, shackled and furious. He was a handsome man in his 30s, with the same dark hair as Alaric, but sharper features and eyes that burned with ambition, barely concealed beneath a veneer of charm. He had always smiled at Seraphina, always played the supportive brother-in-law. Looking at him now, she wondered how she had ever missed the hunger in him. The throne room was packed. Every noble who had stayed in the capital overnight crowded in to witness whatever was about to happen. Alaric sat on his throne looking like he had aged 10 years in a single night. He had tried to visit Lysander's chambers and been turned away by Thorn's soldiers, had tried to countermand Seraphina's orders, and found that half his own guard would not obey him anymore. The realization that he was no longer the undisputed power in his own palace had broken something in him. Seraphina took her place on the queen's throne, Marcus sleeping in a cradle beside her. She had brought her son deliberately, a reminder to everyone watching of what was at stake. This was not about politics or power plays. This was about a mother protecting her child from a man who had tried to murder him. "Prince Lysander," she said, her voice carrying through the silent hall, "you stand accused of high treason, conspiracy to commit regicide, and attempted murder of the crown prince. How do you answer these charges?" Lysander lifted his chin, defiant despite the chains. "Innocent. Completely innocent. These charges are fabrications created by a paranoid queen who sees enemies in every shadow." "We have your letters," Seraphina said calmly, "written in your own hand, detailing your plans to kill Marcus and frame me as an unstable tyrant." "Forgeries," Lysander shot back. "Anyone could have written those and planted them to implicate me. You have no real proof. We have testimony from the courier who delivered your messages to Corvan. We have financial records showing payments you made to Graves for his cooperation. We have 3 servants who witnessed you meeting with the conspirators. All bought and paid for by the queen to create a false narrative," Lysander said. He turned to address the crowd directly. "She has been arresting and executing people for months, purging anyone she perceives as a threat. Now she has turned on the king's own family. Who will be next? How many more innocent people will die before someone stops her?" A murmur ran through the hall. Seraphina saw nobles nodding, saw doubt creeping into faces. Lysander was good at this, turning the accusation back on her, painting himself as the reasonable voice against her tyranny. She had anticipated this, had prepared for it. "Bring in the first witness," she said. The doors opened and they dragged in a man Seraphina recognized as one of Lysander's personal guards. He looked terrified, eyes darting between the queen and the prince. "Tell the court what you told my investigators," Seraphina commanded. The guard swallowed hard. "I was present when Prince Lysander met with Master Graves 4 months ago. They discussed plans to gain access to the prince's nursery. His Highness said the baby was the only obstacle to his claim, that once the child was dead and the queen discredited, the nobility would support him as the rightful heir." "You are lying," Lysander snarled. "I never said any such thing." "Why would I lie?" the guard said, his voice shaking. "You promised me a position in your new regime, promised wealth and titles if I helped. But I have a son too, Your Highness. I could not be part of murdering a baby." The crowd erupted in whispers. Seraphina let it build for a moment before raising her hand for silence. "We have 4 more witnesses," she said, "each one present at different meetings, each one corroborating the conspiracy. Each one willing to testify under oath that Prince Lysander orchestrated the assassination attempt." "They are all lying," Lysander shouted, "all of them bought by the queen to destroy me." "Then let us ask someone who cannot be bought," Seraphina said. She gestured, and another door opened. This time they brought in a woman in healer's robes, someone Seraphina recognized as the palace physician who treated the royal family. "Tell them what you discovered when examining the prince after the assassination attempt," Seraphina said. The healer looked miserable but spoke clearly. "The poison used was nightshade extract, a very specific preparation. I recognized it because I had prepared the exact same formula 6 weeks earlier at Prince Lysander's request. He claimed he needed it for pest control in his gardens." The hall went dead silent. Even Lysander seemed stunned, like he had not expected that particular piece of evidence. "You gave him the poison that was used to try to kill my son," Seraphina said, each word falling like a stone. "You prepared it yourself, at his request." "I did not know what he intended to use it for," the healer said, tears streaming down her face. "If I had known, I swear I would never have made it. I am so sorry, Your Majesty." Seraphina looked at Lysander. His face had gone from defiant to trapped, calculating desperately for a way out. "Still believe these are all lies?" she asked quietly. Alaric stood from his throne, his face ashen. "Lysander," he said, and his voice cracked. "Tell me she is wrong. Tell me you did not do this." Lysander looked at his brother, and for a moment something human flickered across his face, Something that might have been regret or might have been calculation about whether tears would work. Alaric, he started. Brother, you have to understand. Just tell me the truth, Alaric said. Did you try to kill my son? The silence stretched out so long it became unbearable. Then Lysander's face hardened into something ugly and honest. Yes, he said. Yes, I did. Because you are weak, brother. You have always been weak. You let a woman lead you around by your cock for 2 years while the kingdom rotted. Then you let another woman turn you into her puppet. You are not fit to rule. I would have been better. I would have been strong. The hall erupted in chaos. Nobles shouting, guards drawing weapons, Alaric making a sound like something vital had been ripped out of his chest. Seraphina sat perfectly still on her throne, watching her husband shatter. She felt no satisfaction, no vindication, just the hollow ache of being right about something she wished had been wrong. Alaric's hands were shaking as he pointed at his brother. Get him out of my sight, he said hoarsely. Lock him in the deepest cell we have. I do not want to see his face ever again. As the guards dragged Lysander away, he started laughing. The sound echoed through the throne room like breaking glass. You think you have won, he called back to Seraphina. You think destroying me makes you safe. But you have made so many enemies, Your Majesty. So many people who hate you, who fear you. One day, one of them will succeed where I failed. One day you will look over your shoulder and the knife will finally find its mark. Then he was gone, his voice fading down the corridor. The court stood frozen, no one sure what to do or say in the aftermath of a prince confessing to attempted infanticide. This session is concluded, Seraphina announced. The Privy Council will convene in 1 hour to determine sentencing. Everyone else is dismissed. The nobles fled like rats from a sinking ship, desperate to escape the throne room and process what they had just witnessed. Within minutes, only Seraphina, Alaric, and General Thorn remained. Alaric sat down heavily on the steps leading to his throne, his head in his hands. Seraphina stood and walked to him slowly. She did not know what to say. What words could possibly address the fact that his own brother had just admitted to trying to murder their child? I am sorry, she said finally. I know that does not help, but I am sorry you had to hear it. You were right, Alaric said without looking up. About everything. About Evelyn. About Lysander. About me being blind to the people I loved. You saw the truth when I refused to. Being right does not make this hurt less, Seraphina said quietly. For either of us. Alaric looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. What happens now? Now we decide his sentence, and we try to hold this kingdom together long enough for our son to inherit something worth having. She extended her hand to him. After a moment, Alaric took it and let her pull him to his feet. They stood there in the empty throne room, two people who had broken each other and been broken by the world, trying to figure out how to keep functioning when everything hurt. The Privy Council meeting was brutal. Half the council wanted Lysander executed immediately as a traitor and would-be murderer. The other half argued for exile to avoid the appearance of tyranny. High Chancellor Pemberton pointed out that executing the king's brother would make martyrs of anyone else who opposed the crown, turning resistance into open rebellion. Seraphina listened to the arguments with her face blank and her mind churning. Every option carried consequences. Execution would be just, but would cement her reputation as a bloodthirsty tyrant. Exile would be merciful, but would leave Lysander alive to potentially gather supporters and return. Imprisonment would satisfy neither faction. There was no good choice. There was only choosing which future disaster to accept. She looked at Alaric, sitting silent at the head of the table. This was his family, his blood. Whatever they decided would destroy part of him. Your Majesty, she said quietly, the final decision is yours. He is your brother. The sentence should come from you. Alaric's jaw tightened. He looked at each council member in turn, then at Seraphina. When he spoke, his voice was steady but dead inside. Prince Lysander is guilty of high treason and attempted murder of the crown prince. The sentence is life imprisonment in the Eastern Fortress. He will be held in solitary confinement with no visitors, no correspondence, no hope of pardon or release. He will live out his remaining years knowing that his ambition cost him everything and gained him nothing. He paused, his hands curling into fists on the table. And if he ever escapes, if he ever attempts to communicate with the outside world, If he ever poses any threat to my son again, the sentence will be upgraded to immediate execution. No trial. No appeal. Just death. The council murmured agreement. It was harsh, but not as harsh as execution. It would satisfy the call for justice without creating a martyr. It was the kind of cold calculation that kept kingdoms stable. It was also a death sentence of a different kind. Lysander would rot alone in a cell for decades, forgotten by everyone except the jailers who brought his meals. For a man who craved power and recognition, it was a fate arguably worse than a quick death. Serafina saw Alaric understand this, saw him choose the cruelest option available while telling himself it was mercy because his brother would still be breathing. Some scars, she thought, never healed. You just learned to build your life around them. They transferred Lysander to the eastern fortress 3 days later under heavy guard. Serafina did not attend the departure. She spent that morning in the nursery with Marcus, holding her son and trying to believe they were finally safe. But Lysander's final words kept echoing in her mind. You have made so many enemies. One day the knife will find its mark. He was right. She had destroyed everyone who threatened her family, and in doing so, she had made herself into exactly what they accused her of being. A tyrant. A woman who ruled through fear and violence. Someone to be hated and opposed. She had survived by becoming the monster they said she was. And now she would spend the rest of her life waiting for the inevitable rebellion, the next conspiracy, the next person who decided she needed to die. There was no peace for people like her. There was only the knife that had not fallen yet. Lady Helena found her there, staring out the nursery window at the city below. The older woman sat beside her without speaking for a long moment. You saved the kingdom, Helena said finally. You did what needed doing. History will remember you for that. History is written by whoever survives longest, Serafina said, and right now I am not confident about my odds. You are stronger than anyone I have ever known. You will survive because you refuse to do anything else. Serafina smiled faintly. That is not strength, Helena. That is just stubbornness and spite. Sometimes those are the same thing. Marcus made a small noise in his sleep. Serafina adjusted his blanket, making sure he was warm, making sure he was safe. That was all that mattered. Not her reputation, not whether people loved or hated her, just this small human who depended on her to keep him alive in a world full of knives. She would do it, whatever it cost, whoever she had to become, because the alternative was unthinkable. The weeks following Lysander's imprisonment were strange. The palace settled into an uneasy calm, like the eye of a storm that everyone knew would start again eventually. Serafina restructured the Privy Council, replacing anyone she did not trust absolutely. She increased security around Marcus to paranoid levels. She slept lightly and kept a blade under her pillow. Alaric threw himself into ruling with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He worked 16-hour days, personally reviewing every decision, every appointment, every grain shipment. It was like he was trying to atone for years of negligence by drowning himself in responsibility. They barely spoke to each other anymore, not out of anger, just exhaustion. They had nothing left to say that had not already been said. Their marriage existed in a space beyond words, beyond love or hate. Just two people trapped together by duty and blood, and the shared knowledge of how badly they had both failed. 1 month after Lysander's sentencing, Serafina was reviewing reports in her study when Alaric entered without knocking. He looked terrible, like he had not slept in days. I need to ask you something, he said without preamble, and I need you to answer honestly. All right, do you hate me? The question hung in the air between them. Serafina set down her pen and really looked at him, at the exhaustion carved into every line of his face, at the guilt he carried like a physical weight. No, she said finally. I do not hate you, Alaric. Hate requires caring enough to feel something that strong. What I feel for you is more complicated than that. What do you feel? Serafina considered. Sorrow, she said, for what we could have been if either of us had been different people. Respect for the fact that you are finally trying to be a decent ruler, and a kind of tired affection, I suppose, like looking at a scar that used to hurt but now just exists. That is not much, Alaric said quietly. No, Serafina agreed, but it is honest, which is more than we gave each other for most of this marriage. Alaric moved to the window, staring out at the city. I destroyed everything good between us, he said. I know that. I chose Eveline over you. I ignored your pain. I failed you on the night Marcus was born. And when you finally stopped loving me, I had the audacity to be angry about it, like I had any right to your affection after what I did. You are human, Serafina said. Humans make catastrophic mistakes and then spend years trying to live with them. You are not special in that regard. Do you think we can ever be more than this? More than just two people tolerating each other for the sake of duty? Serafina thought about it. Really thought about it. Could she ever look at Alaric without remembering the night she nearly died alone? Could she ever trust him with her heart again? Could the love that had died be resurrected through sheer force of will? I do not know, she said. Maybe. In time. If we are both willing to do the work. But I cannot promise you anything, Alaric. That part of me that loved unconditionally is gone. What is left is more cautious, more guarded. If you want any kind of relationship with me beyond political alliance, you will have to earn it, day by day, choice by choice. No grand gestures, no shortcuts. I can do that, Alaric said. However long it takes. Serafina nodded slowly. Then we start there, and we see what happens. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was just the faintest possibility that maybe, eventually, they could build something new on the ruins of what they had destroyed. It was not much, but it was more than they had yesterday. The storm broke 2 weeks later, on a night when Serafina should have seen it coming but was too exhausted to read the signs. She was in her chambers preparing for bed when the screaming started. Not Marcus. Somewhere else in the palace. Multiple voices raised in alarm. Serafina grabbed the blade from under her pillow and ran toward the noise, her nightgown billowing behind her. Guards were running through the corridors, weapons drawn, shouting orders. She caught General Thorn coming the other way. "What is happening?" she demanded. Thorn's face was grim. Rebels. They breached the south gate, armed insurgents wearing Lysander's colors. They are fighting their way toward the royal apartments. Serafina's blood turned to ice. "Marcus, where is my son?" "Safe in the nursery with a full guard detail. But, Your Majesty, we need to get you to the secure room. Now." "No. I am going to my son. Your Majesty, please." "I am going to my son," Serafina repeated, her voice allowing no argument. "If they want to kill me, they will have to go through him to do it. And that means I need to be there." She ran toward the nursery with Thorn and 4 guards flanking her. The sounds of fighting grew louder as they moved through the palace. Steel on steel, screams, the meaty sound of blades finding flesh. They rounded a corner and ran straight into a group of insurgents. 8 men in mismatched armor, carrying weapons and wearing crude badges showing Lysander's falcon emblem. They saw Serafina, and their eyes lit with recognition and hate. "There she is," one of them shouted. "The tyrant queen. Kill her!" Serafina's guards moved to intercept, but she was faster. Years of fear and rage and survival instinct crystallized into pure violence. She moved like water, like the blade was an extension of her arm, and the first insurgent went down with her knife in his throat before he even registered she had attacked. The corridor erupted into chaos. Thorn and the guards engaged the other rebels, while Serafina fought with a ferocity that surprised even herself. She was not trained for this, was not a warrior, but she was a mother protecting her child, and that made her more dangerous than any soldier. She killed 2 more before Thorn dragged her back, his men finishing the remaining insurgents. Her nightgown was soaked with blood, her hands shaking with adrenaline, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "We need to move," Thorn said urgently. "There will be more." They ran the rest of the way to the nursery. The guards stationed outside were locked in combat with another group of rebels. Serafina saw one of her men go down with a sword through his chest and felt rage explode through her like wildfire. She threw herself into the fight without thinking, without strategy, just raw, desperate need to reach her son. The blade in her hand moved on instinct, finding gaps in armor, throats, anything vulnerable. She fought like a woman with nothing to lose because that was exactly what she was. When the last rebel fell, she stumbled through the nursery door. Marjorie was there with Marcus in her arms, the old midwife standing over the baby with a fireplace poker raised like a weapon. "Your Majesty," Marjorie gasped. "Thank the gods you are alive." Serafina took Marcus from her. Holding him so tightly the baby started to cry. She did not care. He was warm, he was breathing, he was safe. Behind her, she heard more footsteps. She spun, blade raised, ready to kill whoever came through that door. It was Alaric, covered in blood and wild-eyed, his sword drawn. He saw her standing there with their son, and something in his face just broke. "You are alive," he breathed. "So far," Seraphina said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold Marcus. "How bad is it?" "Bad. They hit us from 3 directions. We are holding them off, but there are dozens of them, maybe more. Someone organized this well." "Lysander?" Seraphina said. Alaric shook his head. "He is still locked up. We checked. But his supporters clearly planned this before his arrest. They are here to free him and kill anyone who stands in their way. Which means you, me, and Marcus are the primary targets." "Then we end this," Seraphina said. "We end it tonight." "How?" Seraphina looked down at her son, then back up at Alaric. "We give them what they came for. We bait them into one place and crush them all at once. No survivors, no one left to regroup and try again." "You want to use yourself as bait," Alaric said slowly. "I want to use us as bait, the king and queen together. They cannot resist that target." "That is insane. You will get yourself killed." "Probably," Seraphina agreed. "But if I die taking every single one of these traitors with me, that is acceptable. As long as Marcus lives, I do not particularly care what happens to me." "Well, I care," Alaric said fiercely. "I care, Seraphina. I am not losing you. Not like this. Not ever." "Then help me win," she said. "Help me protect our son. Help me destroy these people so thoroughly that no one ever dares threaten this family again." Alaric looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Tell me what you need." "What?" They staged it in the throne room, the most defensible space in the palace with only 2 entrances. Seraphina sat on her throne in blood-soaked nightclothes, Marcus in her arms, looking like a queen out of nightmare. Alaric stood beside her, sword drawn, equally covered in the blood of men who had tried to kill them. General Thorne spread the word through the remaining loyal guards. The king and queen were making their final stand in the throne room. Anyone who wanted to finish this should come now. The rebels took the bait. They came in waves, pouring through both entrances, screaming for blood and vengeance and Lysander's freedom. What they found was a killing ground. Thorne's best soldiers waiting in alcoves, archers in the gallery, and 2 monarchs who had finally stopped fighting each other and turned all that rage outward at their common enemies. The battle was brutal and short. Seraphina handed Marcus to Marjorie and picked up a fallen sword, fighting beside Alaric like they had trained together for years. They moved in sync, covering each other's weaknesses, pressing forward through the chaos. She saw Alaric take a blade meant for her, saw him cut down a man who had gotten past her guard, saw him look at her across the carnage with something fierce and protective blazing in his eyes. And she realized that somewhere in the last year of horror and betrayal and reconstruction, they had become something new. Not lovers, not the romantic partnership she had once dreamed of, but warriors, allies, 2 people who would burn the world to protect what they had built together. It was not love, but it was real. And maybe that was enough. The last rebel fell. The throne room went silent except for labored breathing and the groans of the wounded. Seraphina stood in the center of the carnage, sword dripping blood, and felt something settle in her chest. They had won. Not just the battle, but the war for their right to exist, to rule, to protect their son from a world that wanted him dead. "Is it over?" Alaric asked quietly. Seraphina looked at the bodies scattered across the floor, at the blood painting the marble, at her husband standing beside her, wounded but alive. "For now," she said, "there will always be another threat, another conspiracy. But tonight, we won." Alaric reached for her hand. She let him take it, her fingers lacing through his, both their hands sticky with blood that was not their own. "We should check on Marcus," he said. They found their son sleeping peacefully in Marjorie's arms, completely oblivious to the fact that his parents had just slaughtered 30 people to keep him safe. Seraphina took him gently, cradling him against her chest, and felt tears finally come. Not tears of weakness, tears of exhausted relief. They had survived. All 3 of them. Against impossible odds and overwhelming enemies, they had survived. Alaric put his arms around both of them, and for the first time in over a year, Seraphina let herself lean into him. let herself accept comfort from the man who had once destroyed her, because she had learned something in the crucible of this night. She had learned that survival was not about being invulnerable. It was about being willing to bleed and fight and break and still get up the next morning. It was about protecting what mattered even when you had nothing left to give. It was about becoming exactly as dangerous as the world required you to be. And Seraphina Vale, Queen of Valen, had become very dangerous indeed. The aftermath of the throne room massacre stretched into weeks of brutal cleanup. Bodies had to be identified, families notified, conspirators rooted out from every corner of the empire. Seraphina personally oversaw every interrogation, every trial, every execution. She wanted no doubt left in anyone's mind that the crown would tolerate no further threats, that the age of soft mercy was over, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. The court watched her with a mixture of awe and terror. This woman, who had once begged for her husband's affection, now moved through the palace like a blade, cutting away anything that threatened stability. She did not sleep much, did not eat unless forced, just worked with mechanical efficiency to rebuild what the rebellion had tried to destroy. Alaric worked beside her, equally relentless. They functioned as a unit now, finishing each other's sentences in council meetings, coordinating military deployments without needing to discuss strategy. It was not the partnership of love. It was the partnership of soldiers who had survived the same war and understood that trust was earned through shared blood, not pretty words. But late at night, when the palace finally quieted and they were alone in their separate chambers, Seraphina felt the weight of everything pressing down on her like a physical thing. She had survived. Her son had survived. But the cost of that survival was written in the bodies stacked in the palace courtyard and the screams that still echoed in her memory. She had become exactly what Lysander accused her of being: a tyrant, a woman who ruled through fear and violence. Someone children would learn about in history books as a cautionary tale about what happened when power corrupted absolutely. The thought should have bothered her more than it did. 1 month after the rebellion, General Thorn came to her study with news. "We captured the last of Lysander's supporters," he said. "A cell operating out of the northern provinces. They were planning another attempt on the prince's life." Seraphina did not look up from the document she was reading. "Execute them all. Public hangings in every major city. I want the message clear. It will be done, Your Majesty." Thorn hesitated at the door. "If I may speak freely." "You may. You have executed or exiled over 200 people in the last 6 weeks. The nobles are terrified. The common people whisper that you have gone mad with power. Even your supporters are starting to worry that you cannot stop." Seraphina finally looked up, her eyes cold and flat. "Do they think I enjoy this, General? Do they think I like being the monster everyone fears? I think they do not know what to think anymore. The gentle queen they remember is gone. What has replaced her is effective but frightening." "Good," Seraphina said flatly. "Frightening means they will think twice before betraying us. Effective means the kingdom survives. I can live with being feared if it keeps my son alive." "And what happens when he grows up?" Thorn asked quietly. "What happens when he learns his mother became a tyrant to protect him? Will he thank you for it?" The question hit harder than Seraphina expected. She had not thought that far ahead, had not considered what Marcus would think when he was old enough to understand the things she had done in his name. Would he see a mother who loved him enough to destroy anyone who threatened him? Or would he see a woman who used him as an excuse to indulge her worst impulses? She did not have an answer, so she gave the only response she could. "That is a problem for future me," she said. "Right now, my only job is keeping him alive long enough to have opinions about my methods." Thorn bowed and left. Seraphina sat alone in the silence, staring at the stack of death warrants on her desk, waiting for her signature. Each one represented a life she was about to end. Each one was justified, necessary, required for the stability of the realm. Each one was another piece of her soul she would never get back. She signed them all without hesitation and tried not to think about what that said about who she had become. The breaking point came on a gray morning 3 months after the rebellion, when Seraphina was in the nursery playing with Marcus. He was over a year old now, toddling around on unsteady legs, babbling nonsense that would eventually become words. He laughed when she made faces at him, reached for her with complete trust, utterly unaware that his mother had killed more people in the last year than most soldiers did in a lifetime of war. Lady Helena found her there, watching Marcus play with wooden blocks. The older woman sat beside her with the careful movements of someone approaching a wounded animal. "You need to stop," Helena said without preamble. "Stop what?" "All of it. The executions, the purges, the paranoia." "You are destroying yourself, Serafina. I am protecting my family. You are becoming the thing you fought against." Evelyn was corrupt and selfish, but at least she enjoyed her cruelty. "You do not even have that excuse. You are just grinding yourself down to nothing in the name of security that will never come." Serafina kept her eyes on Marcus. "What would you have me do instead, Helena? Show mercy. Be gentle. Give my enemies room to breathe and plan, and try again." "I would have you remember that you are human," Helena said. "Not a machine, not a weapon, a human being who has been through trauma and keeps inflicting more trauma on herself because she thinks that is what strength looks like." "It is what strength looks like," Serafina said. "The world is not kind to soft women. I learned that the hard way. There is a difference between being hard and being brittle," Helena said gently. "Hard things bend under pressure. Brittle things shatter. Right now you are brittle. One more blow and you will break into pieces no one can put back together." Serafina finally looked at her. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to grieve," Helena said. "For the woman you used to be, for the innocence you lost, for the fact that you had to become this in order to survive. You have not let yourself feel any of it. You have just kept moving forward, kept fighting, kept destroying threats. But eventually, you have to stop and process what was done to you and what you have done in response. I do not have time for that. Then make time, before it is too late. Before you wake up one day and realize you have won every battle but lost yourself in the process." Helena stood and left, her footsteps soft on the nursery floor. Serafina sat there holding her son, feeling something crack in the armor she had built around herself. A hairline fracture that would spread if she let it, that might shatter her completely if she acknowledged how much she was hurting. She held Marcus tighter and tried to remember what it felt like to be the woman who had loved his father with her whole heart, the woman who believed marriage could be more than a strategic alliance, the woman who thought gentleness was strength and kindness was power. That woman felt like someone from a story Serafina had heard long ago, a character who had died off stage while the real plot moved forward without her. Maybe Helena was right. Maybe she had won every battle but lost the war for her own humanity. Maybe the cost of survival was too high to be worth paying. But when she looked at Marcus, at his small, perfect face and his trusting eyes, she knew she would pay it anyway. Would pay it 1,000 times over, because he was alive, he was safe. And that was all that mattered, even if it meant she became a monster to ensure it. The shift started slowly. In small ways Serafina barely noticed at first. Alaric began coming to her chambers in the evenings after Marcus was asleep, not to discuss politics, but just to sit with her in the silence. He did not try to fill the quiet with meaningless words, just existed beside her, a steady presence that asked for nothing in return. At first Serafina found it irritating. She had work to do, threats to analyze, strategies to plan. She did not have time for whatever this was. But as the weeks passed, she started to look forward to those quiet evenings. Started to relax fractionally when she heard his footsteps approaching her door. Started to remember that isolation was its own kind of death, even if you survived everything else. One night, 2 months after Helena's warning, Alaric brought wine in 2 glasses. He poured without asking permission and handed her one. "To survival," he said, raising his glass. Serafina looked at him for a long moment, then clinked her glass against his. To survival. Though I'm starting to wonder if that is actually a victory. It is, if we decide it is. They drank in silence. The wine was good, rich and dark and warming. Serafina felt it loosen something in her chest that had been clenched tight for months. "Helena thinks I am losing my mind," she said abruptly. "She thinks I have become a tyrant who cannot stop killing." "Have you?" Serafina considered. "Maybe. I do not know anymore. I know that I cannot seem to feel safe no matter how many threats I eliminate. There is always another conspiracy, another person who wants us dead. It never ends. So you keep fighting until you have eliminated everyone who might pose a threat, which is essentially the entire nobility at this point," Alaric said, "which means you will be fighting forever. What else am I supposed to do?" Learn to live with the fear instead of trying to destroy it. Serafina laughed bitterly, spoken like someone who has never been abandoned while dying, who has never watched his child almost get murdered. Easy to be philosophical when you are not the one who had to become a monster to survive. Alaric set down his glass. You are right. I was not the one screaming in a birthing bed while the man who was supposed to love me celebrated with his mistress. I was the coward who put you in that position. But I'm here now, Serafina. I'm trying to help carry the weight you have been bearing alone. If you would let me. Why? Serafina asked. Why do you care now? Is it guilt? Obligation? Or have you actually grown a conscience? All of the above, Alaric said honestly. I was a terrible husband, a worse king. I let my kingdom rot while I chased pleasure and ignored responsibility. You paid the price for my failures, and you have been paying it ever since. I cannot undo that, but I can stand beside you now and try to stop you from destroying yourself in the name of protection. Serafina felt something hot and painful rising in her throat. It is too late for us. You know that. The love I had for you is dead. It died that night, and it is not coming back. I know, Alaric said. I am not asking for love. I am asking to be your partner, your ally, someone you can trust to have your back when the next threat comes. Because we both know it will come. The question is whether we face it together or separately. Serafina looked at him, really looked at him, at the exhaustion in his face that matched her own, at the sincerity in his eyes that had been absent for so long, she had forgotten it could exist. He was not the man she married. That man was shallow and selfish and blind to everything that mattered. This man, forged in the fires of consequence and loss, was someone different, someone who might actually be worth trusting, not with her heart. That was too scarred to risk again, but with her back in a fight, with the safety of their son, with the burden of ruling a kingdom that wanted them both dead. All right, she said finally, we try this. Partners. Not lovers. Not friends. Just two people trying to survive and keep our son alive. No promises beyond that. Alaric nodded. No promises beyond that. They drank the rest of the wine in companionable silence, and for the first time in over a year, Serafina felt something other than rage or fear or exhausted numbness. She felt the faint possibility of peace, not happiness, not joy, just the absence of constant terror. It was a start. The real healing began 6 months later, on the anniversary of the night Serafina nearly died in childbirth. She woke before dawn from nightmares about blood and screaming and being utterly alone, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode. She went to the nursery without thinking, needing to see Marcus, needing proof that he was real and safe and worth everything she had sacrificed. The baby was sleeping peacefully in his crib, one small fist curled against his cheek. Serafina stood over him and finally let herself feel it. All of it. The terror of that night, the abandonment, the rage at Alaric for failing her, the grief for the woman she used to be, the guilt for all the people she had killed in the name of protection, the bone-deep exhaustion of living in constant fear. She sank to the floor beside the crib and wept. Not quiet tears. Ugly, wrenching sobs that tore out of her chest like something vital was being ripped free. She cried for the innocence she lost, for the marriage that died, for the mother she might have been if the world had been kinder. She cried until she had nothing left, until her throat was raw and her eyes swollen and her whole body ached with the force of finally releasing everything she had bottled up. When she finally stopped, exhausted and empty, she found Alaric sitting on the floor beside her. She had not heard him come in, did not know how long he had been there. He did not try to touch her or comfort her, just sat with her in the wreckage of her grief, bearing witness to her pain without trying to fix it. I am sorry, he said when she could finally breathe normally again. For all of it. For making you into someone who had to be this hard just to survive. For failing you so completely that you had to become your own protector because I was too selfish to do it myself. Serafina wiped her face with shaking hands. Apologies do not change the past. No, but they are a starting point for building a different future. Serafina looked at Marcus, sleeping peacefully through his mother's breakdown. What kind of future can we build on this much damage? The only kind that matters, Alaric said. One where our son grows up safe and loved and never has to wonder if his parents will choose him over their own comfort. One where we stop just surviving and start actually living. One where we figure out how to be human again instead of weapons pointed at the world. That sounds exhausting. It probably will be, Alaric agreed, but I would rather be exhausted trying to heal than exhausted trying to destroy everyone who scares me. Serafina laughed weakly. When did you become wise? About 6 months ago, when I realized my wife was on the edge of destroying herself, and I was the only person who might be able to pull her back. Turns out caring about someone other than yourself is motivating. They sat there on the nursery floor until dawn broke through the windows, painting everything in soft gold light. Marcus woke and immediately started babbling for attention. Serafina pulled herself to her feet and lifted him from the crib, holding him close. "Good morning, little prince," she whispered. "Your mother had a breakdown, but I think maybe that means I am finally starting to heal." Marcus grabbed her hair and laughed. Alaric stood beside them, and for the first time since the wedding, they looked like an actual family instead of 3 people trapped together by obligation. It was a small moment, fragile and easily broken, but it was real. And real was something Serafina had not let herself feel in a very long time. Promise. The changes came gradually after that. Serafina started sleeping more than 4 hours a night, started eating meals instead of just surviving on coffee and spite, started letting other people handle minor threats instead of personally destroying every whisper of dissent. She reduced the executions, not because the threats had vanished, but because she finally understood that you could not kill your way to safety. Fear only worked until someone decided they had nothing left to lose. At some point, you had to give people a reason to support you beyond sheer terror. So she started rebuilding what she had torn down, pardoning minor conspirators who recanted, offering amnesty to families who had supported Lysander under duress, showing that the crown could be merciful as well as merciless. The court did not know what to make of it at first. Some saw weakness and tried to take advantage. Those people learned quickly that mercy did not mean toothless. Serafina was still ruthless when necessary. She had just learned to calibrate her response instead of defaulting to maximum violence. Alaric supported her in this, sometimes publicly disagreeing with her decisions to show the court that they were partners who debated, rather than a queen who dictated. It was a careful dance, rebuilding trust in a government that had been on the edge of tyranny. But slowly, painfully, it started to work. The whispers about the Mad Queen faded. The nobles stopped looking at her like she might execute them for breathing wrong. The common people started telling stories about the queen who had saved the empire from corruption, leaving out the parts about how many people died in the process. History, Serafina learned, was kind to victors who survived long enough to write their own narrative. 1 year after the rebellion, the empire celebrated Marcus's 2nd birthday with a festival that rivaled the coronation. The little prince toddled through the palace gardens with his parents flanking him, laughing as nobles and common folk alike brought gifts and well wishes. Serafina watched her son bask in the attention and felt something that might have been contentment, not happiness. She was not sure she remembered how to be genuinely happy anymore, but a kind of peaceful acceptance that this was her life now. This was what she had built from the ashes of who she used to be. "He is going to be a good king," Alaric said beside her. "Better than either of us, because he will grow up seeing what happens when rulers fail their people. He will know the cost of negligence and the price of tyranny, and hopefully he will find a middle path we never managed." "If we survive long enough to teach him," Serafina said, "there are still people who want us dead." There will always be people who want us dead. That is the nature of power. The question is whether we let that fear control us or whether we accept it and live anyway. Serafina looked at him. "When did you become an optimist?" "When I realized the alternative was watching you work yourself to death out of paranoia." Alaric's hand found hers, their fingers lacing together naturally. "We are going to be okay, Serafina. Not perfect, not healed, but okay. And sometimes okay is the best you can hope for." Serafina squeezed his hand once, then released it. She was not ready for sustained physical affection. Was not sure she ever would be. But small moments like this, brief connections that acknowledged they were in this together, those she could handle. Marcus stumbled and fell, skinning his knee. He looked up at his parents with his face scrunched up, deciding whether this warranted crying or not. Serafina knelt beside him, brushing dirt off his clothes. "You are all right," she said firmly. "It hurts, but you are strong enough to handle it. Up you get." Marcus sniffled once, then pushed himself back to his feet and kept walking. Alaric laughed. That is definitely your son, he said, falls down and gets back up without complaint. That is what survival looks like, Serafina said. You fall. You bleed. You get up anyway, because the alternative is staying down, and we do not do that. She stood and took Marcus's hand, guiding him through the garden. Alaric walked on the other side, and together they made their way through the celebration. 3 people who had survived horrors that should have destroyed them. 3 people who had learned that strength was not about never breaking. It was about breaking and then rebuilding yourself into something harder and wiser and infinitely more resilient. The festival lasted until sunset. When it was over and Marcus was asleep in his nursery, Serafina returned to her chambers and found a letter waiting on her desk. It was from the Eastern Fortress, from Lysander. She almost threw it away without reading it. Then curiosity got the better of her. She broke the seal and scanned the cramped handwriting. "Sister," the letter began, and Serafina almost laughed at the audacity. "I hear you have been showing mercy lately, pardoning conspirators, offering second chances. I write to ask if that mercy might extend to me. I know what I did was unforgivable. I know I tried to murder your son, but I am still Alaric's brother, still family, and I have had 2 years alone in this cell to think about my choices and regret them. I am asking, not for freedom, but for the chance to see my brother once more before I die in this place. To apologize. To make what small amends are possible. If you can find it in your heart to allow this, I would be grateful. If not, I understand. I am getting what I deserve. Lysander." Serafina read the letter twice, then set it down carefully. She stared at it for a long time, feeling the old rage stir. This man had tried to kill her baby, had conspired to destroy everything she had built, had almost succeeded in ending her family. She could refuse, could let him rot in that cell without ever speaking to Alaric again. Could take that small revenge and feel justified in doing so. Or she could do the harder thing, the thing that terrified her because it meant acknowledging that even monsters were human, that even the people who hurt you worst were still capable of regret. She took the letter to Alaric's chambers. He was reviewing reports, looking exhausted as always. He glanced up when she entered. "You need to see this," she said, handing him the letter. Alaric read it slowly. His face went through a dozen expressions before settling on something that looked like pain and hope tangled together. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. Serafina sat across from him. "I think your brother tried to murder our son and deserves to spend the rest of his life regretting it in solitary confinement. But I also think that holding on to rage forever is its own kind of prison. And I am tired of being controlled by fear and anger. So if you want to see him, I will not stop you. Would you come with me?" Serafina closed her eyes. That was asking a lot. Asking her to face the man who had almost taken everything from her. Asking her to be in the same room with him without trying to kill him herself. But maybe that was the point. Maybe real strength was not about destroying your enemies. It was about being strong enough to let them live with their consequences. "Yes," she said finally. "I will come with you. Not because I forgive him, I do not. I never will. But because you need to see him, and you should not have to do that alone." Alaric looked at her with something that might have been love, or might have been profound gratitude. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. I might still kill him when I see his face." Alaric laughed weakly. "Fair enough." They made the journey to the Eastern Fortress 2 weeks later, leaving Marcus in the capital under heavy guard. The fortress was exactly as grim as Serafina expected, all cold stone and iron bars and the smell of despair. They brought Lysander to a small meeting room rather than his cell. He looked terrible, thin and pale, with his hair gone gray and his eyes haunted. 2 years of solitary confinement had broken something fundamental in him. When he saw Alaric, something in his face just crumpled. "Brother," he whispered. Alaric stood frozen for a moment, then crossed the room and embraced him. Lysander sobbed against his shoulder like a child, all his pride and ambition stripped away to reveal the broken man underneath. Serafina watched from the doorway, her hand resting on the dagger at her belt just in case. She did not trust this, did not trust that his regret was real. But she had promised Alaric she would come, and so she stayed. When Lysander finally pulled away, he looked at Serafina. His face went even paler. "Your Majesty," he said, "I do not expect forgiveness. What I did was monstrous, unforgivable. I tried to kill your child. I tried to destroy your family. I deserve everything that has happened to me and worse. Yes, Serafina said flatly, you do. Lysander flinched but did not look away. I was consumed by jealousy and ambition. I looked at what Alaric had and wanted it for myself. I told myself I would be a better king, that I deserved the throne more. I let that poison rot inside me until I became capable of ordering the murder of an infant. There is no excuse for that, no justification. I am asking for nothing except the chance to say I am sorry and mean it. Serafina studied him, looking for deception, for manipulation, for any sign that this was another scheme. What she saw was a broken man who had gambled everything on ambition and lost, who would spend the rest of his life in this cell knowing he destroyed his own family for power he never obtained. It was not enough to erase what he had done, but it was something. I do not forgive you, Serafina said. I probably never will. What you did to my son, what you tried to do to my family, that is not something I can let go. But I hope you live a very long life, Lysander. I hope you have decades to sit in this cell and think about your choices, because that is a far worse punishment than a quick death would have been. Lysander nodded, tears streaming down his face. I know, and I deserve every second of it. They left shortly after. Alaric was quiet the whole journey back to the capital, processing whatever emotions came from seeing his brother reduced to that. Serafina let him have his silence. She understood grief, understood that sometimes the only thing you could do was sit with it until it became bearable. That night, back in the palace, Alaric came to her chambers. He looked utterly drained. Thank you for coming with me, he said. I know how hard that was. It was necessary, Serafina said. For you. And maybe for me too. I needed to see that he was actually broken, that the threat was really over, that I could stop looking over my shoulder waiting for him to try again. Is it over? Alaric asked. The fear, the constant vigilance, Serafina considered. No, I do not think that ever really goes away, but maybe it gets quieter. Maybe I learn to live with it instead of letting it control me. Alaric sat beside her on the bed. We are going to be all right, he said. Not today, maybe not this year, but eventually. We survived the worst things that could happen. Everything else is just details. Serafina leaned her head against his shoulder, just for a moment, just long enough to feel the solid warmth of another human who understood what she had endured. Then she pulled away and stood. I am exhausted. You should go. Alaric nodded and headed for the door. He paused at the threshold. Serafina. Yes, I love you. I know you do not want to hear it. I know the woman who loved me back is gone. But I need you to know anyway. What we have now, this partnership, this alliance, it might not be romance, but it is real, and I would burn the world before I let anyone hurt you or Marcus again. Serafina looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said finally, and that is enough. He left. Serafina stood alone in her chambers, feeling something settle inside her. Not peace, not happiness, but acceptance. This was her life. This was who she had become. A woman who had survived horrors and emerged harder and wiser and infinitely more dangerous. She would never be the gentle queen who begged for affection. That woman was dead and gone. What remained was something fiercer, something that had learned that love without respect was worthless, that mercy without strength was suicide, that survival required becoming exactly as ruthless as the world demanded. She had paid the price for that knowledge in blood and grief and the death of her innocence. But she had survived. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. But 5 years passed. Marcus grew into a bright, curious child who asked endless questions and showed an alarming talent for strategy in the games he played with the palace children. Serafina watched him develop and saw glimpses of both his parents, Alaric's charm and her ruthless practicality. It was a dangerous combination, but she thought it might make him exactly the king the empire needed. The court had settled into stable prosperity. The purges were over, replaced by careful administration and genuine attempts at justice. Serafina and Alaric ruled together as genuine partners, their relationship never romantic, but deeply trusting in ways that mattered more. On the 6th anniversary of the night Serafina nearly died, they held a private ceremony in the palace chapel. Not a recommitment of their marriage vows. Neither of them were interested in pretending that kind of love still existed. Instead, they made new vows, promises to protect Marcus together, to rule with both strength and mercy, to never again let their personal failures endanger the kingdom, to honor what they had built from the ruins of what they had destroyed. It was not a fairy tale ending. There was no dramatic reconciliation or rekindling of romance, just two damaged people acknowledging that they had survived the unsurvivable and would face whatever came next as allies. Serafina stood in the chapel afterward, watching Alaric talk with Marcus about something that made the little boy laugh. She felt the weight of everything she had endured settling into something bearable, not forgotten, never forgotten, but integrated into who she was now. She had been the queen who loved unconditionally and was destroyed for it. She had become the queen who trusted no one and ruled through fear. Now she was the queen who had learned to balance both extremes, to be soft with her son and hard with her enemies, to show mercy when possible and ruthlessness when necessary, to love carefully and trust slowly, and never again mistake kindness for weakness. It had cost her everything to learn those lessons, but she had learned them, and she had survived. Lady Helena approached, older now but still sharp-eyed. "You did it," she said quietly. "You survived and stayed human. That is rarer than you think." "Barely human," Serafina corrected. "I am not sure the woman I used to be would recognize what I have become. The woman you used to be would not have survived what you endured. The woman you are now did. I call that evolution, not loss." Serafina smiled faintly. Evolution. I like that better than corruption. They walked together through the palace gardens, where nobles and servants mingled during the anniversary celebration. Everyone bowed to the queen as she passed, respect mixed with wariness. They did not love her the way they might have loved a gentler monarch, but they respected her, feared her, trusted her to keep the empire stable even when that required hard choices. And that, Serafina had learned, was worth more than love anyway. As the sun set over the capital, painting everything in gold and crimson, Serafina stood on her balcony with Marcus on her hip and Alaric beside her. They watched the city spread out below them, thousands of lives depending on their ability to keep functioning despite the scars they carried. "Tell me a story," Marcus demanded, tugging on her sleeve. "What kind of story?" Serafina asked. "A story about a queen who was really brave." Serafina looked at Alaric. He smiled and nodded. "All right," she said. "Once upon a time, there was a queen who thought love would save her. She learned the hard way that it would not. So she saved herself instead. She became hard where she had been soft. She became ruthless where she had been forgiving. She did things that would have horrified the woman she used to be. But she survived, and her son survived. And eventually she learned that survival was its own kind of heroism, not as pretty as fairy tales, but real. And real was better than any fantasy. Did she live happily ever after?" Marcus asked. Serafina kissed the top of his head. "No," she said honestly. "But she lived. And some days, that was enough." Marcus seemed satisfied with that answer. He snuggled closer, already half asleep. Alaric's hand found hers on the balcony railing. Their fingers intertwined, a gesture so familiar now it had become unconscious. "We made it," he said quietly. "We did," Serafina agreed. "Not intact, not unbroken, but alive. And that was always the point, was it not? To survive long enough to see what comes next." "And what do you think comes next?" Serafina looked out at the empire they had nearly destroyed and then rebuilt, at the city celebrating another year of peace, at the son who would inherit all of this someday and hopefully do better than his parents had. "I think we keep going," she said. "Keep trying, keep learning, keep surviving. Because that is what we do. That is who we are now." Alaric nodded. "To survival, then." "To survival," Serafina echoed, "and to the people we had to become to achieve it." They stood together as the darkness fell over the capital, three people bound together by blood and trauma and the stubborn refusal to let the world break them permanently. It was not the ending Serafina had dreamed of when she married Alaric 6 years ago. That naive girl who believed in love and fairy tales was long dead, but it was the ending she had fought for, had bled for, had become a monster to achieve. And in the end, that made it the only ending that mattered. Queen Serafina Vale had spent years loving a king who did not deserve it. Then she had spent more years hating him and herself and everyone who threatened her family. Now finally she spent her days simply living, protecting what mattered. ruling with wisdom earned through suffering, raising a son who would inherit her strength without her scars. She was not happy. Happiness was a luxury she had learned to live without. But she was alive. Her son was alive. Her kingdom was stable. And some mornings, when the sun rose over the palace and Marcus laughed at something silly and Alaric smiled at her with genuine warmth, she thought that might actually be enough. Not fairy tale enough. Not romance novel enough. Just real enough to matter. And Seraphina Vale, who had survived the unsurvivable and emerged from the fire as something harder and truer than she had ever been, decided that real was the only kind of enough worth having.